It's very concerning to us in the EU.
Truth
This
Talks.
is a clear step backwards.
Breaking news.
The introduction of the death penalty, together with the discriminatory nature of the law.
Legal analysts say the legislation breaches international law. Under those regulations, Israel's occupation of the West Bank is considered illegal. That means its parliament has no authority to pass laws there.
This law enshrines extrajudicial killing and constitutes a racist status embodied by this system since its inception, as it targets Palestinian prisoners alone. Therefore, it's a crime against humanity and must be confronted by all legal and human rights means and methods.
Detained Palestinians are already at risk of death. Since October 2023, at least 89 Palestinians have died in Israeli prisons. Rights groups say most died due to torture, lack of food, and medical neglect. Now the risks are even higher.
My son carried out an operation, and I don't know if this law applies to him. I fear for his life. None of us could sleep last night. My son has been in there for 3 years now, subjected to hunger, thirst, cold, and illnesses.
An appeal has been filed against the law at the Israeli Supreme Court, which has regularly come under political attack from Prime Minister Netanyahu and far-right politicians. For now, Palestinians will await the outcome of that battle. To learn whether the hangman's noose, worn as an emblem of the law's supporters, becomes the latest tool of Israel's system of repression. Nargis Mobalaghi for Inside Story, Al Jazeera.
Our panel join us in a moment, but first, from Antwerp in Belgium, we're joined by Francesca Albanese. She's the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories. Thank you for joining us. When you look at all the things facing Palestinians, you could at least, until now, say that although the death penalty was legally on the Israeli statute book, it was something that wasn't being used. What's your reaction to the fact that's now changed?
Yeah, my reaction is that with this law, after invoking the right to starve and the right to torture the Palestinians, now Israel claims also and can use the right to hang the Palestinians directly from prison, based on a discriminatory legal regime, which further worsens the apartheid features of the Israeli system and crashing completely any resemblance of due process.
So can this be challenged in Israeli law and in international law, and how do you do that?
From an international law point of view, there is no question that this law is unlawful. First and foremost, because it continues to apply to the occupied Palestinian territory. The International Court of Justice has already declared the occupation unlawful, so Israel has no jurisdiction, no right whatsoever to continue to legislate. And as I said, it continues the pursuit of discrimination against the Palestinians. So it could be challenged by bringing once again the Israeli leaders, those who are the architects of this law before the International Criminal Court, or using universal jurisdiction against them, as I've already recommended in my last report, after documenting 2 years of torture used against the Palestinians detained after October 2023.
But the problem is it not? Already the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court have proceedings. It's the world community. It's all the countries of the world. They're not backing the international justice with regard to Israel.
No, absolutely. I wouldn't say that it's all countries, because there are countries like South Africa, Colombia, Malaysia, and the other countries who have joined the ICC, the other countries who have joined the ICJ proceedings for genocide. There are countries who would like to advance justice. Unfortunately, there is a a stronghold guaranteeing Israel's impunity, headed by the United States and followed by many European states, who are vanifying the efforts of decades in order to build the international criminal law system that we have, to turn it into what we have, and they are dismantling it day after day.
What do you make of the timing of all of this? Because the context is, of course, you still have the situation in Gaza where more than 70,000 people have been killed, the majority of them civilians. You already have an appalling situation in the West Bank. You have Israel involved in the bombardment of Iran and bombarding Lebanon. Do you think Israel right now feels the world can't keep up with all of the things it's doing, and that's why it's continuing to do more things?
Absolutely. Israel has been emboldened by the impunity that has historically been granted to it, but particularly in the last 2 years, despite the fact that Israel has been ordered to dismantle the occupation, and it has been given by the International Court of Justice 1 year to do so. And there is an obligation on the other member states not to aid, not to assist, not to recognize as legal the consequences of an unlawful act. So they remain engaged with Israel. They remain engaged with Israeli leaders, despite the fact that even the prime minister is wanted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes and crimes against humanity, despite the genocide proceedings. So this is why I said it's these member states who continue to treat Israel business as usual are to an extent complicit. This will have to be determined by a court of law. But of course, from my perspective, from my observation point, Israel is accelerating the genocide against the Palestinian people through a variety of acts that are destructive for the body, for the soul, and the end game is the ethnic cleansing of Palestine.
Thank you, Francesca Albanese, UN Special Rapporteur. Well, now let's meet our panel of guests on today's Inside Story. And in Ramallah, we have Mustafa Barghouti, General Secretary of the Palestinian National Initiative political party. And Rehovot in Israel, Ofer Kasif, a member of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. And in London, William Sharbas, Professor of International Law at Middlesex University and author of the book, The Abolition of the Death Penalty in International Law. Thank you all for joining us. Let me start with you, William. We've had important developments, but I think it's important probably to tell our viewers first what the situation was before this law, because Israel did have the death penalty, but there hadn't been an execution for more than 60 years.
Israel is what we call in the United Nations and international law a de facto abolitionist state. It has not used the death penalty for 60 years. I don't think people have even been sentenced to death, but certainly it hasn't been carried out for 60 years. There were only 2 executions in the history of Israel. So this is a very dramatic development not only if the legislation survives the Supreme Court, but also if it's implemented. It's an extremely rare occurrence for a state that has stopped using the death penalty to revert to the practice of the death penalty. There are only a handful of countries where this has happened, and now Israel joins that rather unhappy and miserable club.
Ofer, you are a member of the body that voted for this, the Knesset, 62 law members to 48, and champagne corks being popped while it happened. Are you ashamed of this vote?
Ashamed is an understatement. It's much more than being ashamed. But that's not the first time that I've been ashamed of this specific parliament, the 25th Knesset. But no doubt that this is the peak of the malicious behavior of this specific Knesset and coalition. That's disgusting, to say the least. And I actually entitled this law not as a death penalty law, but as a genocide law. And if you allow me, I can explain logically why it should be regarded as a law that actually enables, not to say requires, genocide.
Why should it be called the genocide law?
Well, apart from the law as such itself, that we should analyze and refer to, and I believe we will do that, we have to see the specific context, the context of the political discourse, mainly within the coalition, but also in the public, in the society at large. Two things should be observed. First, that there is a common parlance within the public and especially within the coalition discourse that there's nothing as such as Jewish terrorism. If there is nothing like Jewish terrorism, that also means or entails logically that there aren't Jewish terrorists. And if there aren't Jewish terrorists, that means that this law doesn't appeal and apply. This law doesn't apply to Jews by definition. On the other hand, the very same who argue that there's nothing such as Jewish terrorism argue that all Palestinians are terrorists. Just 3 days ago, literally, the chair of the Interior Committee of the Knesset, who is a member of the gang of Ben Gvirs, said, and I quote, that there aren't innocent people in Jenin and that there aren't innocent children in Jenin. That's common parlance. Now, if there aren't innocent Palestinians, neither children, that means that all Palestinians, according to those bigots, are terrorists.
Okay.
And if all terrorists should be hanged,
let me bring in Mustafa as our representative of the Palestinians, if I can now. Mustafa, I mean, we have discussed issues on this program so many times together. I assume now it takes a lot to shock you, but the fact this passed and you saw this go into law, and you just heard Ofer talk about Ben Gvir, the architect of this. He was wearing a golden noose-shaped lapel pin. What do you think of the people who pushed this into law?
It's very simple. The passing of this criminal law, which is another war crime by Israel, and the way they celebrated the passing of this law, and the pens you have just described, which shows ropes that will be used to hang us, the Palestinians. All of that shows you one thing. Israel has moved so far in the direction of fascism. This is a fascist government, and these are fascist ministers, and this is a fascist establishment. Nothing else can be said about this behavior. They are not only fascist, they are also consolidating the deepest and most clear system, worst system of apartheid. At the time of South African apartheid system, nobody dared to say that if a black man kills a white man, he will be executed, but if a white man kills the black man, he will not be executed. That's exactly what Israel is saying. Palestinians only can be executed. Palestinians only will be subjected to death penalty. And that is the worst form of a system of apartheid. But more than that, what you see here is an act to legalize the crimes that are happening against Palestinians. The fact that Israel is executing Palestinians through field execution. I think there are between 1,000 and 2,000 cases of field execution practiced by Israel, especially in Gaza. It is a way of legalizing the fact that Israeli troops go around and assassinate people. And it is a way of legalizing the fact that Israel killed so far 90 Palestinian prisoners since the 7th of October in Israeli jails. They're killing people by torture. They're killing people by depriving them of food, by starvation. And they're killing people by deprivation of medical treatment. And more than that, those who even rape Palestinians, as in the case of the 5 Israeli soldiers, they are relieved from any responsibility. And their cases were dropped against them. So that shows you what we face here is not only a war crime, is not only a system of apartheid. What we face here is a system of fascists who want to impose their fascist laws on the Palestinian people.
William, the global trend for some considerable time has been towards abolition of the death penalty. There's been condemnation of this move from the European Union, from the United Kingdom, from the United Nations. The US, though, the State Department, says it respects Israel's sovereign right to determine its own laws and penalties for individuals convicted of terrorism. The US itself gets a lot of criticism for its death penalty and the amount of executions, more than 1,000 people put to death since the 1970s. But what Israel's done here doesn't even have the guardrails that the US system does it? And I'm not just talking about the discrimination, the fact this only faces Palestinians.
You know, the US death penalty is also characterized by discrimination. And it's been demonstrated, criminologists have shown how it's not the people themselves, it's not by the race of the offender, but by the victim. So that if the victim of a murder is white, a black man is much more likely to get the death penalty than if the victim of the murder is a person of color. So there's a lot of racism that it infects the US justice system generally, but it also affects the application of the death penalty. That being said, for many years, the death penalty has been declining in the US, but there has been an uptick since the beginning of last year, since Trump became the president, mainly in the state of Florida. And, you know, it's kind of an irony. The 3 states in the world now that are moving backwards, that are moving towards more executions, besides Israel, are the United States and Iran. They're the 3 worst as we speak right now. There are only about 30 countries in the world that now use the death penalty out of nearly 200. And of those 30, the majority only use it very occasionally. So it's becoming increasingly isolated. And all that does really is underscore how special this is, what's happening in Israel. It's as if they don't care about what the rest of the world thinks of them.
Ofer, I mean, in terms of public opinion, I think that's pretty shocking. Israelis, as far as I can see, seem to support what the Knesset has done. But I did think it was interesting and rather grim, the fact that this legislation specifies the way to kill people, and the people in this case are Palestinians, as hanging. And that, as I understand it, is because Israel's doctors' union won't carry out lethal injections.
Yeah, that's true, but I think that that's relatively marginal. Obviously, I oppose to any kind of death penalty, whoever was convicted and whoever was the victim. In principle, I think that we should regard any kind of death penalty as a murder by the state. You know, that reminds me a very famous myth or story about great Alexander, who once faced a pirate. And a pirate said, if you have one boat to rob others, you are regarded as a pirate. If you have a navy of boats to rob others, you are regarded as great Alexander. So I can paraphrase it and say that if you kill, perish the thought, 1 or 10 or even 20 people, you are a terrorist. But if you allow yourself to kill hundreds, you are the government of Israel. And obviously that's what we should reject, whether it's by hanging or a lethal injection or guillotine or whatever. I agree with you that using hanging, part of the problem here, although again the marginal one, is that it also involves torture and it involves suffering of the victim. But in the end of the day, the most important thing that we should fight against is the very existence of death penalty in general, and in this case, of racist death penalty, because as I said before, eventually it amounts to genocide.
Mustafa, this would apply to Palestinians, including those that have Israeli citizenship and live inside Israel, but can I focus on a moment on the Palestinians in the West Bank, because they face supposed justice in military courts, and I believe the military courts have a conviction rate of over 99%, and then there's virtually no appeal under this legislation.
Absolutely, and that makes the life of every prisoner in Palestine, in Israeli jails, who I consider hostages actually, and they should be called hostages. Each one of them is threatened now, even those who have been already taken to court and had their judgment, because we know that people like Ben-Gvir and other fascists can simply reopen cases so that they would achieve what they want, as the fascist Ben-Gvir said, hang them one by one. So yes, there is very big risk to all those who are in prison now and those who will be arrested later. But what I want also to say that this war, the goal of this decision, of this resolution, of this law that they have passed, is if they think this will deter Palestinians, it will actually create the opposite effect. Because this is another very powerful message to Palestinians that Israeli community, Israeli public, Israeli society does not want peace and have no place for compromise with Palestinians. It is a message that this government is only a government of war, and the only future they have for Palestinians is either death or displacement. And let me tell you that we would not have reached this level of fascism if it wasn't for the silence of the international community.
Okay, well, let me bring that point, if I may, to William, who is our international lawyer on the panel. Under international law, Francesca Albanese already told us, yeah, this is wrong, but is anything going to happen? Because Israel doesn't care about international law. You could say it ripped up international law with what it did in Gaza.
Well, Israel is going to get its knuckles rapped in various international fora. When it goes before the Human Rights Council, it's going to be denounced for doing this. When it goes before the UN Human Rights Committee, it's going to be denounced for doing it. But yes, there is this kind of an indifference that they have towards what international law is saying. You know, on the other hand, a couple of weeks ago, they filed their reply in the case of South Africa that they've taken against them in the International Court of Justice. They managed to round up a handful of countries who intervened in the case in an attempt to support them. So sometimes they want to fight about international law, but on this one, they are so far away from the evolving international standards on the death penalty. So international law recognizes that some states still have the death penalty, but it sets out rules about how it can be used and so on. And everything about this legislation violates it. You know, James, there's an interesting contrast with the Palestinians. The Palestinian Authority 7 years ago ratified the treaty abolishing the death penalty and international law. They've taken the high road. Israel is taking the low road.
Ofer, so that's international law. Tell me about Israeli law. Going to be challenges in the Supreme Court. Do you think that is a viable option to get this overturned?
I do believe that the Supreme Court will revoke, if not the law entirely, at least some sections or elements of this law, because they are so anti-constitutional. And so I find it very difficult to see that although the Supreme Court, I must say, the Supreme Court in Israel has been part of the occupation and apartheid machine for ages. We should not trust the Supreme Court as if it is a liberal island or a democratic island within the apartheid ocean. It is not. But still, to some extent, it is not as bad as this government. So I find it very difficult to believe that some clauses of the and sections of the law will not be revoked. But if I may add, in one sentence, I put a lot of the blame for this law on the international community. There's been a genocide going on in Gaza for almost 3 years. The international community has done nothing. While we are speaking here, there's an ethnic cleansing going on in the West Bank, and it becomes worse and worse, not on a daily basis, but hour by hour.
Okay.
I've been visiting my Palestinian
if I
friends
can
in
just bring
different
in Mustafa to have a very quick last word. Mustafa, do Palestinians, the law, you say international law, Israeli law, I mean, what does law courts mean to Palestinians now? Anything?
Exactly. I don't think changing any clauses in this death penalty law will make a difference. It's death in any way. So it's unacceptable in every possible way. Second, I think the international community is responsible because all it does is condemnations, statements, UN resolutions. There are more than 1,000 UN resolutions condemning Israel. Israel doesn't care. The only thing that will make a difference if the international community starts imposing sanctions on Israel, if the international community, if Britain, France, Germany, Italy, and others stop using double standards, 11,000 sanctions on Russia in less than 2 months, and not a single sanction on Israel, we will not believe in international law and the role of international community unless they start imposing sanctions and boycott on Israel. That is the only thing that will change the course.
Mustafa Barghouti, Osif Kasif, and William Shahbaz, thank you for joining us today on Inside Story. You can see this discussion and, in fact, all of our programmes again anytime you want at aljazeera.com. Post your views or comments on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or tag us when you're on X. Look for @AJ Inside Story. That's it for now from me, James Bays, and all the team. I'll be back here again very soon. Al Jazeera's continuing coverage will be back in just moments.
I have condemned the massive military strikes by the United States and Israel and the subsequent attacks by Iran.
Attacks on energy facilities on both sides is a dangerous precedent. It will cause repercussions throughout the world.
We can now see a regional conflict with unintended consequences.
Stay with Al Jazeera for the latest developments.
That would precipitate an attack against American forces.
To prevent Iran from getting nukes.
There is no coherent strategy, and you can see that's reflected in the media coverage.
Many American media see it like a video game. From the graphics on the screen to who they speak to, war for them is big business.
We saw this exact same pattern happen in Gaza, the same lazy, flattened reporting that we saw in Gaza when it comes to the war on Iran.
The Listening Post decodes the media on Al Jazeera.
Hello, I'm Tom McRae. This is Al Jazeera with continuing coverage of the war between the US, Israel and Iran. Coming up, Donald Trump to give a formal address to the nation on the Iran war. The US president earlier said Iran has asked for a ceasefire, but Tehran denies that claim. The Iranian president sends a letter to the American people saying his country has no hostility towards the people of the US, Europe or its neighbours. Israel under fire. Iranian missiles strike Tel Aviv, injuring 3 people and damaging water systems.
3, 2, 1, booster ignition, and liftoff.
And in other news, the first crewed mission to circle the moon in more than half a century blasts off from Florida with 4 astronauts on board. US President Donald Trump says Iran has asked for a ceasefire. The statement comes just hours before Trump's address to the nation, scheduled for 1 GMT. That is in exactly an hour. We will be covering the speech live from the White House. Well, earlier posting on social media, Trump said Washington will consider the offer once the Strait of Hormuz is open, free and clear. Until then, quote, US forces are blasting Iran into oblivion. But Iranian officials have told Al Jazeera those diplomatic conversations have not taken place and deny asking for a ceasefire despite Trump's claims. In a letter addressed to the American people, Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian says the Iranian people harbour no hostility towards the American people, Europe or neighbouring countries. But the letter says Trump's threat to attack Iranian vital infrastructure would be a war crime, and such actions carry consequences that extend far beyond Iran's borders. Well, we have a team of correspondents following all of these latest developments. We are live in Tehran, Amman, Doha, Beirut, and the White House, and that is where we're going to start with our chief US correspondent, Alan Fisher. Alan, obviously, huge amounts of anticipation ahead of Trump's speech in an hour's time. What are we expecting him to say, given his comments in the lead up to this?
Well, of course, he talked about a ceasefire in his social media comments first thing on Wednesday. We're hoping we might get more information on that. I think that is unlikely. He will talk about how he's winding down the war in Iran. Now, he's talked about a 4 to 6 week timescale. We're 4 weeks into the war. He gave an interview on Tuesday and said it was likely to last another 2 weeks, possibly with a couple of days either end of that. So that would put it 2 weeks from now. And maybe he'll give more detail on that. He is going to talk about NATO. He's going to be hugely critical of NATO. We've again seen on social media over the last 48 hours how he's very resentful of the way he believes that NATO have ignored the United States. He's talked about how they could have helped to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, that they are more reliant on the oil that passes through there than the United States. And he believes that they didn't come to the aid of the United States when they needed them, while fighting the war in Iran. And then, of course, there is the whole question about the economy. And Donald Trump is aware that everyone feels as if prices are much more higher now than they have been since the war started. It's more expensive for fuel. That means it's more expensive for heating. It's more expensive for food. All of that impacting on the weekly budgets of ordinary Americans. So he'll say that he understands that there is a problem there, but he's going to say that this is short-term pain for long-term gain. He believes the long-term gain is a stable Middle East. That means that oil will be stable as well. And also he believes that it will deprive Iran of any opportunity to develop not just nuclear weapons, but a threat to its neighbours and ultimately to the United States as well. He'll speak, we're told, for somewhere in the region of 15 minutes. Clearly, he's going to say that the war in Iran has been a success. He's mentioned it several times. He's talked about how this war has been won. He wants to walk away with a victory, as does any president who's involved in a war. So he'll make that case to the American people. But the American people will be much more interested in what he's got to say about the economy rather than how this war has been prosecuted.
Okay, thanks so much, Alan. No doubt we will be coming back to you before he speaks in a little under an hour's time. Alan Fisher at the White House for us. Well, let's bring you more of Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian's letter addressing the American people. In it, he says attacking Iran's vital infrastructure, including energy and industrial facilities, is a direct attack on the Iranian people. Beyond constituting a war crime, such actions carry consequences that extend far beyond Iran's borders. Is America First truly among the priorities of the US government today? The choice between confrontation and engagement is both real and consequential. Its outcome will shape the future for generations to come. We're going to go to Mohammed Val, who is in Tehran for us. And we can just continue talking about this letter from the Iranian president, just hours before the US president is set to speak at the White House. Can you just run us through what else it says and what message he is trying to send? What's he trying to achieve by sending this?
Yeah, it's a message about what the Iranian president considers the reality and not the propaganda and not the fake news or the framing of Iran as a threat to the region and to the world. So this letter is to address that situation and give the American people the real and true image of Iran as a country of peace, as a country that is one of the most ancient continuous civilizations in the world, a country that has never invaded another country or waged a war on its neighbors for hundreds of years, even since before the creation of the United States. and that what is being propagated by the American leadership is only a framing of Iran. It's a fabricated image of a dangerous Iran to justify this war of aggression on Iran, basically saying that Iran is not trying to wage wars against its enemies, but it is trying to defend itself. And the fact that America has bases in the region around Iran and buildup of troops all the time for the last several decades means that Iran feels that it is the United States that is posing a threat to Iran's existence and safety, and that justifies for Iran to build its own weapons and to be a strong country. Also talked about this war as not an American war. He considers it a proxy war on behalf of Israel, and that it is not for the benefit of the United States. So he is addressing the American people and trying to show them how their leadership is wrong about how it is framing this war against Iran.
And Trump, as we heard, said that he's going to blast Iran to oblivion. From what you're seeing on the ground there, what does that actually look like, though?
Well, that is the intent. It's very clear that the amount of bombing and the quality of those bombs, the weight of those bombs, tells a lot about what the Americans want to do. They really want to destroy the most of the infrastructure, particularly the military infrastructure. But we have seen also civilian infrastructure being hit during the last several weeks, at least 4 weeks now. Of that, there is a lot of hospitals. There is a lot of other facilities, power facilities, and so on that have been hit. During the day today, we have seen more blasts in Isfahan in particular. We don't know what's going on there. The government is not giving clarity about it, but the Americans are saying they are hitting at ammunition depots there in Isfahan. We have also seen blasts in Shiraz and in other cities and across Tehran, of course, during the day. There was 4 people were killed in Laristan, another region of Iran. Also, Bandar Abbas was at the receiving end of some of the blasts. And we have seen what looks like an assassination attempt against the former Foreign Minister Kamal Kharazi. He is the head of the Strategic Council on Foreign Relations, and he's a former advisor to the late Supreme Leader. We don't know why he's been targeted. He has been gravely wounded. His wife was killed. The Israelis and Americans haven't owned or taken responsibility for this operation, but it is a subject of concern again because Iranians have been threatening that any more assassination in the country means that Iran is going to retaliate against more American interests, particularly high-tech and AI technology facilities or companies in the region, because Iran thinks that those companies are helping with the targeted assassinations in Iran.
Okay, thank you so much, Mohammed Val, for us in Tehran. Well, debris from an intercepted Iranian missile attack has injured at least 4 Israelis near Tel Aviv. Fragments from a cluster missile also damaged water infrastructure in the Bnei Brak district. A number of vehicles were damaged. Several areas of Tel Aviv have reportedly been hit. We're going to go to Rob McBride now, who's been following developments in Israel from the Jordanian capital of Amman. And this all adds up to a significant increase in attacks from Iran today on Israel, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. This latest attack, in fact, happened just a little more than an hour ago. Sirens were sounded once again, as they have been throughout Wednesday, through central Israel and also the occupied West Bank. The missiles were detected incoming. There were a number of impacts reported around 10 or so through central Israel and into the northern part of Israel, but centered around the city of Bnei Brak, where there was some damage reported and also 3 injuries. But this was the 11th missile strike throughout Wednesday. These strikes began early Wednesday morning, continued throughout the day. The authorities say that these salvos collectively amounted to one of the busiest and one of the most intensive missile barrages since the earliest days of this conflict. And one of the heaviest strikes came during late in the afternoon on Wednesday, involving at least 10 missiles, and also in conjunction, as often is the case with rockets being fired by Hezbollah north of the border in Lebanon. But the timing of this is significant. It comes ahead of the long-anticipated address by US President Donald Trump. This seems to be Iran's way of saying we are still a force to be reckoned with, and we have the missiles to back that up. It also comes on the first day of Passover, probably one of the most important events in the Jewish calendar, and came at a time of the day when families would traditionally be gathering together for the meal that marks the start of this holiday. So it does seem as though this was meant to cause a maximum amount of disruption.
And as we've heard, Israel has intensified its strikes on Iran, obviously ahead of Donald Trump speaking in less than an hour now. How is Israel viewing the potential move that Donald Trump might actually try to start winding the war down from here?
Yeah, I mean, Israel is weighing up its options, but all dependent on what Donald Trump is going to announce. There are various ways forward. It could be the case that Donald Trump is going to turn once more to ultimatum and deadlines, saying that you will open the Strait of Hormuz. Until you do so, we're going to increase the aerial bombardments, maybe resort to ground forces. If all of that resulted in a further weakening of Iran, Israel wouldn't be too unhappy about that, but would be happy to go along with its continued airstrikes. It still has a list of targets it wants to hit. Probably the least desirable option for Israel is that some magical deal has been agreed behind the scenes that is suddenly going to be announced, or that they're very close to announcing it. And a condition of that is an immediate ceasefire, and it has to stop its attacks into Lebanon against Hezbollah. Finally, there is the messy option where US President Donald Trump and the US simply go for the exit. They leave the war behind. They say Hormuz is blocked. There is still an unresolved conflict. It is for the region and the world to sort out. And in such an environment of instability, it is possibly something that Israel could exploit. It could continue with impunity its attacks on Iran, not to the same degree without US help, but the US, it seems, might not interfere with its continued attacks on the Iranian regime.
Okay, thanks so much, Rob McBride, for us there in Amman. Hezbollah says it has targeted several groups of Israeli soldiers in southern Lebanon. There have been no immediate reports of casualties. It comes as the military expands its occupation of the south. Sirens have also sounded in central Israel in response to incoming Hezbollah missiles. Well, for the very latest, we're joined now by Heidi Pett, who is live for us in Beirut. And Heidi, can you just bring us up to speed on all of these latest developments, especially in the south of the country?
Yeah, I mean, the Israeli ground invasion continues to expand in South Lebanon. We have seen Hezbollah claiming once again dozens of operations against Israeli troops at multiple locations along the border, ranging from the coastal region in the west near the village and indeed to the north of the village of Naura now, where Israeli troops are expanding. They're heading down towards the coast in near a village called Bayada. We've also seen Hezbollah claiming attacks on Israeli troops once again in Hiam, and also the village of Antara, where they say that they've been firing rockets, artillery and drones at Israeli troops who are attempting to expand and push deeper and further into Lebanese territory. Now, that has been supported once again by a number of airstrikes across the south in the last 24 hours. The death toll here in Lebanon has risen to 1,118 people killed, nearly 4,000 wounded, and one strike in particular in the district of Nabatea earlier this morning killed an entire family, Mohammed Hamia, his wife Rima, their two daughters Noor and Hanan, giving you some indication of the climbing civilian death toll across Lebanon.
Okay, thanks so much for that update, Heidi. Heidi Pett for us in Beirut. Well, interceptions have been heard over Dubai as Iranian strikes continue to hit Gulf nations. Kuwait says its international airport was hit by a drone attack targeting fuel tanks. The latest strike caused a large fire and damaged fuel storage facilities. No deaths or injuries were reported. And a tanker leased by Qatar Energy has been damaged off the coast of Qatar after being hit by a projectile. The British Maritime Monitoring Agency said the incident happened about 30 kilometres north of the industrial city of Ras Laffan. Well, for the latest, Victoria Gatenby joins us from Doha. And from drone attacks to these cruise missile strikes on tankers, how hard a day has it been for these Gulf states?
Well, it has been a difficult day for these Gulf states, and it continues to be a difficult night. We've heard in the last few minutes from Saudi's Ministry of Defense, which says it has intercepted and successfully destroyed a ballistic missile that was heading towards its eastern provinces. Now, that is the region in Saudi Arabia where most of the oil production facilities are based, and that region has been relentlessly targeted over the past 4 weeks by the Iranian military. Now, we've also had warning sirens being sounded in Bahrain in the last hour as they prepare for some kind of incoming missile or drone assault on their territory. But if you were going to talk about one country that is really at the epicenter of Iran's attacks really over the last few weeks, that would be the UAE. The Ministry of Defense there has released statistics in the past few hours where they say they have been targeted with more than 2,000 drones over the past 4 weeks, more than 400 ballistic missiles, and almost 20 cruise missiles. And while most of those have been successfully intercepted, we saw on Wednesday in the city of Fujairah that a man had been killed by debris that was intercepted successfully there. But he was killed because debris fell on that area. Now, we've also seen over the past few days, Iran relentlessly target this region's energy infrastructure as it has throughout this conflict. So we've seen the attack on Kuwait International Airport, drones hitting fuel tanks, which caused what the Civil Aviation Authority there described as a major fire. That's the second time in a week that fuel tanks at that international airport have been targeted. This time round, they managed to get the fire under control relatively quickly. But last week, it took almost 3 days for them to get that fire under control. And of course, here in Qatar, we have seen an oil tanker off the coast of Qatar, 31 kilometers off the coast of Qatar, being targeted by 3 cruise missiles. Now, 2 were intercepted, but 1 actually hit that oil tanker. There was some damage to the hull above the waterline, but you can imagine how terrifying that would be for the 21 crew members on board that oil tanker. So these attacks continue relentlessly day in, day out, and authorities in GCC countries continue to demand that Iran stop attacking its neighbors. And of course, they will all be watching, the leaders of the GCC countries will all be watching what Donald Trump has to say in the next half hour to see what direction this conflict is going to go in.
Okay, thank you so much, Victoria. Victoria Gatenby for us in Doha. President Trump says he's strongly considering withdrawing the United States from NATO. His comments expose a widening rift in the transatlantic alliance over the Iran war. NATO chief Mark Rutte is due to visit the White House next week for what the Western military alliance says is a long-planned visit. Now correspondent Rory Chellens reports from London.
That Donald Trump has been souring on NATO recently is no secret.
They don't want to help us defend the strait, and they're the ones that need it. We're very disappointed with NATO because NATO has done absolutely nothing. I think a tremendous mistake was when NATO just wasn't there. They just weren't there.
That he's considering leaving the 77-year-old military alliance must now be taken seriously, following an interview with British newspaper The Telegraph. Oh yes, I would say it's beyond reconsideration, Trump said. I was never swayed by NATO. I always knew they were a paper tiger. And Putin knows that too, by the way. A genuine possibility or Trumpian bluff to extort support for his war? That's the calculation leaders are having to make. This was the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
Whatever the pressure on me and others, whatever the noise, I'm going to act in the British national interest in all the decisions that I make. And that's why I've been absolutely clear that this is not our war, and we're not going to get dragged into it.
And from the French government.
Ça s'appelle la défense collective et la dissuasion aussi.
Let me remind you what NATO is. It is a military alliance concerned with the security of the Euro-Atlantic region. It is not designed to carry out operation in the Strait of Hormuz, which will be a breach of international law.
De l'espace euro-atlantique.
But European security would be shattered without US involvement. There is no NATO without the US. as the Polish defense minister admitted on X, though he added, there is also no strong US without its allies, without us. This memorial honours the British servicemen and women who fought in Afghanistan and Iraq, wars led by America but fought alongside its allies, NATO allies. So alliance members have a pointed reply to Donald Trump's criticisms. The only time the alliance's mutual defence clause was ever invoked was not to defend Europe, but to defend America after 9/11. Rory Challens, Al Jazeera in London.
Let's take a look at some other world news now. NASA's Artemis 2 mission is on its way to the moon, carrying humans back there for the first time in 53 years.
Lit. 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition. And liftoff.
American astronauts Christina Koch, Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover and Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen will spend 10 days in deep space, flying around the moon but not touching down. That's planned for a future mission. Colin Baker has more on the crew's journey.
On its way to the farthest reaches, the Artemis space program has sent 4 astronauts on a loop around the moon.
It marks an important step.
It's a program that began during Donald Trump's first administration.
For the first time since 1970.
And it will be the first crewed mission to the moon in more than 50 years. Over 10 days, its crew will study their own health in the harsh weightlessness of space and photograph the moon from a few hundred kilometers away. The mission aims to prove the journey can be practical for humans and eventually can land people on the moon again, a goal China is also pursuing. Artemis is a U.S. project with international support. Europe, Japan, the United Arab Emirates are all involved. Canada built a robotic arm and gave it an astronaut. The moon holds few guaranteed resources or security advantages. It is a possible source for a fuel that could drive future nuclear power, but it could be a stepping stone to explore the solar system. The moon has always been a distant prize. The Soviet Union took the first photo of it from space in 1959. And then in the late 1960s, the United States and the Soviet Union raced to land their robots and put their satellites into its orbit. But all of that was just the beginning. Over 4 wild years, 12 humans bounced and drove across its surface. And then the moon was quiet for decades, until the early 2000s, when a new space race kicked off. Major powers sent more probes. China landed 6 and sent pieces of the moon back to Earth. And now private companies are getting there too. 70 years of lunar exploration, roughly divided into 2 chapters. The U.S. space agency NASA has had a tumultuous year. The White House Budget Office proposed major cuts, but the Congress voted to maintain funding. Staff departures have been high.
Commercial and international.
In March, Administrator Jared Isaacman promised to build a U.S. moon base within the next 7 years for $20 billion. The request came days after media reports said the Pentagon wanted $200 billion to fund the Iran war.
The vehicle's ready, the system is ready, the crew is ready, and behind this flight stands a campaign. Landings, a lunar base, a nuclear propulsion into deep space. That begins, not ends, with what happens on Wednesday evening.
If the mission succeeds, these 4 astronauts will go farther from home than any humans before them, around the far side of the moon. They'll be blocked from all communication from Earth while they're there, and for a few hours, they'll be totally cut off from the world below. Then they'll return to it, to splash down in the Pacific Ocean. Colin Baker, Al Jazeera.
The top US court has been hearing arguments on the validity of President Donald Trump's executive order limiting automatic birthright citizenship. President Trump's order would prevent automatic citizenship for children born in the US to non-citizens and non-residents. The birthright citizenship clause is part of the Constitution. Trump attended the session, making him the first sitting president to do so. Paddy Culhane reports.
Now, would you shout?
Outside the Supreme Court, a sizable crowd loudly demanding the justices uphold what has been the law of the land since 1868. All babies born here are automatically American citizens. Inside the court, a first for the country, U.S. President Donald Trump, the first sitting president to be in the room while the justices were hearing arguments over his executive order to end birthright citizenship for the children of migrants in the country without documentation or people visiting.
Unrestricted birthright citizenship contradicts the practice of the overwhelming majority of modern nations. It demeans the priceless and profound gift of American citizenship. It operates as a powerful pull factor for illegal immigration and rewards illegal aliens who not only violate the immigration laws, but also jump in front of those who follow the rules.
After court, the president took to social media, posting, "We are the only country in the world stupid enough to allow birthright citizenship." That is actually not true. This map shows more than 30 other countries with birthright citizenship, including Mexico, Canada, Brazil, and Pakistan. After the hearing, the lawyers suing to keep universal birthright citizenship expressed optimism.
I am confident that the court is going to turn back this president's effort to radically rewrite our 14th Amendment rule of birthright citizenship.
Protesters will likely be back when the court announces that it's made a decision, but that's not going to happen very soon, at earliest likely in June. Patty Culhane, Al Jazeera at the Supreme Court.
Well, Burkina Faso's military government has announced reforms to the country's school system. It says the changes will boost national sovereignty and patriotism among children. But activists say the restoration of civilian rule should be a higher priority. Malcolm Webb reports from a school near the capital, Ouagadougou.
Burkina Faso's military government says singing the national anthem in local languages will help these children grow into patriotic citizens, and that so will their locally made traditional clothes. It says it's introduced 13 local languages in schools. Since taking power 4 years ago, its leaders have distanced themselves from the former colonial power, France, and expelled its military. All the classes were taught in French in the school that we were allowed to visit.
La révolution a ouvert 700.
It was the Minister for Primary School Education who gave us permission.
Aujourd'hui, comment on fait pour que l'école
This change in schools is about allowing our children to relearn our national history, to be educated in civic values, and to have a sense of patriotism. It's when you are not patriotic that you can betray your country. So what would be the point of opening schools when all the people who are there will destroy and spoil this country?
Destroying the armed groups, which have attacked schools in most parts of the country, is something the military government says is its priority. It says it's recapturing territory. Since Captain Ibrahim Traoré led the coup and took power in 2022, conflict observers say the armed groups have grown stronger and reached further than ever before. Here, near the capital Ouagadougou, is one of few parts of the country that's remained relatively peaceful. The government says by growing crops in schools, it can feed the children and reduce dependency on food aid. And it says by teaching the children patriotism, it will prevent future generations from picking up arms and fighting the government. Burkina Faso has been ruled by leaders who took power by force for most of its history since independence from France in 1960. Traoré says his government draws on the philosophy of the iconic Pan-Africanist Thomas Sankara, who took power in a coup in 1983 and was killed 4 years later in another. Learning the history at his memorial is encouraged. Questioning or criticising Traoré's government is not. Journalists and rights activists have reported death threats, arrests, disappearances and military conscription. Many have fled the country. We spoke to Binta Sidibe Gascon in Paris.
What the children of Burkina Faso need is the rule of law to be restored. If the rule of law is restored, everyone will recognize their rights. They don't need to be subjected to propaganda, insisting they sing the national anthem in the local language or that they wear traditional dress. No, the reason people turn against the state is because of injustice and impunity.
The government says its critics are enemies of Burkina Faso's development, along with the armed groups and France. The children here will grow up to find out if the latest chapter of military rule will bring any change or peace. Malcolm Webb, Al Jazeera, Ouagadougou.
Well, you're watching Al Jazeera's extensive coverage of the conflict between the US, Israel and Iran. These are the latest developments this hour. US President Donald Trump is set to address the nation and the world in around half an hour's time. Trump is expected to say that the US war against Iran will be over within the next few weeks. He's also reportedly preparing to heavily criticize NATO allies for not doing enough to help the US. Iran's president has issued an open letter to Americans urging them to look beyond manufactured narratives on the war in Iran. Masoud Pezeshkian says his country bears no hostility toward people in the US, Europe, as well as neighbouring countries. Well, gas storage facilities in Europe are emptier than usual after winter. Well, companies that officially start refilling their depots on the 1st of April are reluctant to buy, with gas prices skyrocketing since the Iran war began last month. The European Commission is urging citizens to save energy. Sepp Vassen has the story from the Netherlands.
I'm here at one of Europe's largest gas storages near Amsterdam. Here, gas is stored underground for winter time. But this facility here is only about 12% full. Companies usually start filling these storages at the start of April. But now buyers are reluctant due to high prices. And with the weather not getting any warmer, these storages are getting emptier every day. Europe imports around 85% of its natural gas. The European Union made gas storage mandatory after 2022, when Russia's war with Ukraine triggered shortages. But the rule that all EU countries should fill their gas storage depots by 90% by November 1st was relaxed last year after it drove up gas prices. The result is that at the end of March, gas storage facilities across the EU are now only around 28% full, compared to 33% this time last year, and 58% the year before. In Germany, storages are now only 22% full, compared to 29% in 2025. And in the Netherlands, they are extremely low at only 5%. Still, the key message in Europe is not to panic. The EU hopes that these underground storages supplying 1/3 of gas consumption in winter will still be filled. And if not, governments will have to dig deep into their pockets to buy expensive gas, a price consumers will face in their energy bills.
We say remain cool-headed, let the market do its work, but make sure to look at emergency scenarios. We therefore recommend the government to look into the option of using so-called cushion gas needed to keep the pressure inside these storages as a last resort in case of an emergency.
Brussels warns Europe could soon face a severe energy crisis and is calling on EU citizens to save energy. But so far, countries like the Netherlands have not followed this advice. If gas storage capacity isn't increased soon, Europe could face shortages, especially if the war between the United States, Israel and Iran lasts longer and gas supplies remain low. Sepp Vassen, Al Jazeera, Bergenmeer, the Netherlands.
Well, it's time to see how the war in Iran is impacting the global financial markets. From London, here's Milena Vasilinovic.
Hello and welcome to Al Jazeera studio in London. Our roundup would look at how the Iran conflict will ultimately affect the cost of borrowing. Now, while the Iran war continues to cloud economic forecasts across Europe, UK and European stocks rallied on Wednesday after the US president signaled the month-long conflict in the Middle East could come to an end soon. The cost of a barrel of oil is now hovering at around the $100 mark. And here in the UK, where the conflict continues to push up the cost of everything from food to mortgage to interest rates, the British Prime Minister sought to reassure the public over the economic fallout. Rory Challens reports from Westminster.
This is not our war and we will not be drawn into the conflict, Keir Starmer has told the country once again. But like many nations, this war is having an effect at home in the cost of everyday things. And at a time when the UK's economy has been flatlining for years, the prospect of rising costs and lower growth, that's called stagflation, is striking fear into the heart of this government. Keir Starmer wants to calm nerves and stiffen spines.
It is now clear that the impact of this war will affect the future of our country. So today I want to reassure the British people that no matter how fierce this storm, we are well placed to weather it, and that we have a long-term plan to emerge from it a stronger and more secure nation.
So the government is talking up a package of measures. Wages are going up in the form of the national minimum wage and the national living wage. Household energy bills, at least for the moment, are coming down, And there is a new fund to help poorer households with things like heating oil costs, food and medicines, etc. But Keir Starmer knows that this is not going to be enough. For one thing, some of these measures predate the war. And also, when the current energy price cap expires in July, prices are going to go up. And there's currently no plan that we know of yet to deal with that. Rory Challens, Al Jazeera, London.
Well, we asked Londoners whether they thought the British government was doing enough to protect them from the impact of the Iran war.
Petrol and diesel prices are rising quite rapidly at the moment, and we were talking about it earlier, and I don't think it's enough. He said, oh yeah, I'll do this, I'll do that, I'll cap it. But to be honest, prices are still rising.
I mean, they're listening, but they're not really actually doing anything towards it.
For people to survive, it starts to be a little bit problem.
I think it's tough for everybody, isn't it? Realistically, they've never really done enough for the general working man, have they? So, to my mind, it sounds a bit cliche, but the answer today is simply no. They're not doing enough.
Well, Riz Malik is a mortgage broker and director of R3 Wealth. He's here with me in London. Thank you so much for being with us. We've heard some thoughts there from the streets of London, but I want to ask you something else, something we've heard from the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. He is saying that Britain is well placed to weather this economic storm, and yet we've heard warnings from the International Monetary Fund this week, OECD last week, that Britain is actually uniquely vulnerable to the shocks of this war. What's your take on this?
I found it very funny when I heard Keir Starmer's comments. In the United Kingdom, we're used to paying income tax, value-added tax, and now more and more householders are going to pay the Trump tax. So the whole concept that the country is settled and can handle the economic storm that is not only brewing, but is well on its way, I think is completely not true. I would listen more to what the OECD is saying, and also the governor of the Bank of England as well has made comments. We are not, faced, and we're steering down the barrel of a major economic problem here in the UK.
Really good to cut through all of that. Riz, stay there with us, because I want to talk about the bond markets, actually, because one way that governments raise money is through bonds, and that's important because the global bond market is worth, now wait for it, it's $143 trillion. Now that is 143. That is followed by 12 zeros. You can see it all popping out behind me. It is an overwhelming number, and it's a figure substantially higher than the value of the stock market or the entire global economy. Now, Riz, can we talk a little bit about this? What has been the impact of this war on the bond market, which is basically where governments and investors kind of like issue new loans and trade existing ones? So what's been happening with that?
So the one thing financial markets don't like is instability, uncertainty, and volatility. And since this war has started, we've had all of those three components in absolute truckloads. The implications have been, especially on UK gilts, which are UK government debt or government bonds, has been that the yield on them, so basically the return on them, the price the government has to pay to borrow money, has skyrocketed. And that's had implications and will continue to have implications throughout the economy, not only just for individual households, but also for businesses as well.
Riz, we'll chat a bit more in a minute, but I want to talk a bit about why do bonds matter? Well, the bond market is usually seen as a safe investment, but the war in Iran has sent investors diving for cover. They've sold off their holdings and bond rates have risen. And that is bad news for consumers because it means the cost of borrowing will have to rise accordingly. So mortgages and loans become more expensive. And that's something that Sonia Gallego has been looking into.
Daily life in this London neighbourhood looks relatively normal. It's the sort of buzzy area that plenty of people would dream of owning a home in. But that's already quite out of reach for a lot of people. And it's about to get a lot harder to even think about owning a home here. Reason why? Well, that has to do with the war in Iran and rising petrol prices. Why? Because when the price of oil goes up, so does everything else. And that's where the pressure starts. It drives inflation higher. When inflation rises, investors want better returns to lend money. So they demand higher interest rates on government debt, known as bond yields. When the government borrowing becomes more expensive, borrowing costs rise across the entire financial system, including banks, and banks pass those higher costs directly onto consumers.
Everyone who has already secured a mortgage rates, pretty competitive, are not scared of going and buy a property. They have realized that waiting 6-12 months would not help them to find a better home or whatsoever. Whereas you have buyers who have started to look and with the rates right now or prefer to just wait a little bit.
So even just a slight raise in rates can mean paying out hundreds more each month. Lenders are already raising those mortgage rates, and it's predicted to go up even further. So that's how a global conflict over energy supplies can quickly filter into the cost of owning a home in the UK. Sonia Gallego, Al Jazeera, London.
Well, Riz Malik is still with us. Now, Riz, we've heard there about the impact on mortgages from Sonia's report. But if this war doesn't end soon, and if the issue of Hormuz remains unresolved, how will that impact on people trying to get any other kind of a loan?
So mortgages have been massively impacted, especially since the start of this conflict. But it's not just mortgages. Let's look at the wider economy here. Businesses looking to grow and expand already being hit by a number of increased costs following recent budgets, for example, the rise in national minimum wage. When the cost of borrowing is high, businesses tend to put their plans for growth and expansion on hold. As a result, that can feed into employment, that can feed into innovation. This country at the moment, if you look at our GDP record, is on the floor. And the last thing that we need is anything to stifle innovation, productivity, and creativity.
On the floor, pretty strong words there, pretty strong words from Riz Malik. And also there's some worries about interest rate hikes as well. This year, it's something that Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, has been talking about. The Bank of England will make a decision on UK interest rates at the end of April. And the governor, Andrew Bailey, said it may still be too soon to expect rates to go up.
What we've seen in the last 2 weeks is, we've seen two things. A lot of volatility, clearly. I mean, we've had mornings and afternoons where that expectation has moved around a lot, frankly. But sitting here today, obviously it's come down. It's still pricing us to raise rates, and I would still say, I think that is a judgment markets have to make. But I think they're getting ahead of themselves.
Whereas, Malik, you've heard that the governor of the Bank of England trying to calm things down a little bit. But what's your take, though?
Before this conflict started, we had 2 to 3 Bank of England base rate cuts priced in for 2026. Within such a short period of time, not only have they all been wiped away, but now traders were forecasting maybe 2 increases in the cost of borrowing from the Bank of England. Andrew Bailey and the rest of the Monetary Policy Committee have been very slow in reacting to previous economic instances that we've had. Look at the fallout following the Ukraine and the cost of living crisis. We were just getting to that point where interest rates were starting to come down, will feed through to an increase in activity in the housing market, and this geopolitical shock has absolutely turned everything on its head. So no good news there. The only good news will come when this ends.
Riz Malik, Director of R3 Wealth and a mortgage broker. We do appreciate all your thoughts and your insight. Thank you for being with us. And thank you for watching us here from London. That's it from me, Milena Veselinovic, and the team in London. Now I'll hand you back to Doha.
Donald Trump is about to address the nation on what is next for the US-Israeli war against Iran. Well, these are live pictures of the White House. It is the US president's first primetime address to the country from the White House since the war began. In his earlier statements, Trump indicated the war was just a few weeks away from a conclusion. On Wednesday, Trump told Reuters the US could go back to do what he called spot hits in Iran if necessary. Also on Wednesday, Trump said Iran wanted a ceasefire and an end to hostilities. But Iranian officials have denied those claims, saying they wanted reparations for the damages done by the US and Israeli strikes. It's unclear how Trump plans to address Iran's control over the Strait of Hormuz. He has said that strikes will continue until it's opened, but also said the US could leave that to European allies. He has also denounced NATO allies for not doing enough to help the US. Well, we have a panel of experts to help us analyse President Trump's speech, as well as all the latest developments. But first, we're going to go to our chief US correspondent, Ellen Fisher, who is standing by at the White House. Ellen, we're only minutes away from hearing from Donald Trump, his first primetime address since the war began. Can you just run us through exactly what we can expect?
Well, just remember, it is pretty rare for a president to ask for essentially a primetime address from the White House. Now, we can accept that Donald Trump is always on, always there, he's ever present. We hear from him almost every day, and of course there's the social media feeds as well. But this is quite a big deal. Now, we're expecting him, first of all, to attack NATO. He's very unhappy with his NATO allies. He thinks they should have done more. He doesn't believe that they've come to help the United States during the war in Iran. And he's going to talk about the possibility of leaving the NATO alliance. He may well give a window on how much longer he thinks this war is going to last. He's talked about it being 4 to 6 weeks. We're 4 weeks in. That would leave another 2 weeks. And in an interview he gave on Tuesday, he talked about the possibility of the war going on for another 2 weeks. But just in the last half hour, Fox News here in the United States, which is very close to Donald Trump, tends to be right-leaning, they have suggested that Donald Trump is going to make the case to the American people that at some point he may need boots on the ground in Iran, first of all, to bring a war to at the end, but also to secure the stockpiles of enriched uranium that the Iranians actually have. Now, that has been talked about before, particularly over the last couple of days, but it's never been confirmed by anyone from the administration. So that is something that we're going to keep an eye out on. And also, he's got to address the cost of the war. For many people, the higher prices are reflected in anything they do when they go to the store. Their weekly bills are much higher, their money seems to go less further. And so he will talk about how he understands the pain, but also he's going to say that, look, this is short-term pain for long-term gain. He believes that in the long run, this is going to be beneficial to the United States, to the Middle East, and to the world as a whole. What is also interesting is in a leaked video that has just come out, Donald Trump speaking at an Easter lunch. It shouldn't have been made public, but it's been on YouTube. One of the things he says is that when he goes on air tonight, he's going to tell the country just how great he is.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Ellen. To discuss all of this a little further, we're joined by David DeRoche, who is a professor at Thayer Marshall Institute and a former Pentagon director of Arabian Peninsula Affairs. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for being with us again, David. Obviously, a lot of anticipation about exactly what Trump could say. What are you expecting to hear from him? What options really does he have in front of him 5 weeks into this war?
Yeah, well, he has a remarkable number of options, to be honest. I think that he's going to have 3 messages for 3 different audiences, and they'll be slightly contradictory. I think for the American people, he'll say, we're winning. There's a little bit of hiccups here. It didn't go as fast as we wanted, but the price hikes, the oil charges, and gasoline is temporary. For the Iranians, it will be, I've given you my conditions. You comply with them. We can step this up even further. We have measures that we have not taken yet that we are considering. And then I think for America's traditional partners and allies, the message is going to be, we don't get oil from the Persian Gulf. You do. You need to be with us, and you need to physically do something. Don't expect us. We're solving a security problem for you that you refuse to acknowledge. Don't expect us to solve that and your economic problems on our own.
I want to bring in Henry Enscher, who is a former U.S. ambassador and Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. He joins us from San Diego. Henry, what kind of message do you think he needs to send to the American public and how they're viewing this war at this point in time, that he hasn't done so already? How much clarity does he need to give right now about exactly what has been achieved and what is yet to be achieved?
So look, if he's able to actually put a timeline on it that's a matter of a couple of weeks, then, politically, I think he'll be fine. I also think, though, that asking Americans to take real pain, which is a rise in the price of gasoline in exchange for possible benefits somewhere down the road, is never a successful approach with the American public. And then finally, if he is going to go for putting people on the ground inside Iran, he's really going to have to lay out what the plan is, what we expect to get out of that, and when it might end. Otherwise, the political pain will continue.
Indeed. Harlan, I want to bring you in now. Harlan Ullman is a former senior naval officer joining us from Washington, D.C. As well. Obviously, one option in front of Donald Trump is troops on the ground, which has been talked about for many weeks now. From a military perspective, what does that actually mean? And how, I guess, the fear is that they could continue to prolong the war for more than just a couple of weeks.
The fact is, because our forces have performed so well so far, apparently, we have got great expectations. A Marine Marine Expeditionary Unit only has 1 battalion of 800 infantrymen. That cannot do a great deal. And even a regiment of the 82nd Airborne, no matter how well trained, only has beans, bullets, batteries, and water for 2 or 3 days. So at best, they might be able to take a small island. At worst, you could have a Black Hawk Down, you could have a Bridge Too Far, or a Gallipoli. So using military force on the ground right now is not a very good objective. Let me make 2 other points. The president is threatening NATO. Congress has passed a law saying that we cannot withdraw from NATO without congressional approval. And the lurking problem here is that if we go too far, Iran has a very nasty card to play. They can take out the desalination plants, for which 95% of all the fresh water in the Persian Gulf is made. That would be a humanitarian catastrophe. So we need to understand using ground forces can be more than perilous. We cannot withdraw from NATO without congressional approval. And if we get into a situation where destroying infrastructure such as desalination, this could be a humanitarian catastrophe of the first order.
Yeah. Richard Schmira, I want to bring you in now. You're a former US ambassador to Oman. You also join us from Washington, D.C. Richard, obviously, everyone wants to avoid a humanitarian catastrophe, as we heard from Harlan there. Obviously, the Gulf nations are going to be watching President Trump's speech very, very closely. How concerned will they be that Trump could actually pull back without a deal in place to reopen the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, I think in doing a nationwide speech tonight, President Trump probably wants to use it primarily to reassure the American people who are very concerned that this war might drag on and is already costing a considerable amount in terms of the economy. So I think it's a political move to try to get that message to the American people. As for the Gulf, any escalation in the current war could be very detrimental to not just the Iranian people, but the others in the Gulf, particularly if civilian infrastructure such as desalination plants began to be hit. So even though they certainly would like to see Iran change its policies and potentially see some kind of regime change, I don't think the countries of the Gulf want to see an escalation that could endanger their own infrastructure. So I think everybody on these who Trump will be trying to reach will be looking for some way to say this is going to be toned down, it's going to end soon enough, and any short-term pain will go away in a relatively short time.
Okay, David, I want to bring you back in on this. Is Trump able to pay the cost of a ground operation in Iran amid, these rising oil prices that we've seen, not just in the US, but right around the world, and I guess a growing affordability crisis, as well as some of the deep political divisions that we're seeing grow even wider over the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, he can, but it's going to be a limited ground operation. So as Harlan pointed out, you don't have enough forces in there to seize and hold ground on the mainland against a determined enemy. What you can do is conduct raids. You can land forces, take out specific objectives, You'd rely heavily on mobility, control of the air, and especially the element of surprise. But there's also a strategic effect just in having these forces. Right now, the Iranian security forces, all they have to do is hide underground. If there's a threat of some sort of land action, they have to move out to attempt to meet that. That exposes them, makes them more vulnerable. So even if the Marines never get off their boat, as with the Marine Amphibious Operation Desert Storm, they never left the boat, but they can still have a strategic effect.
Henry, if I can bring you back in here, how closely is this all being followed by the American public, and what will they specifically be looking for? Is this all about the cost of living and affordability in oil prices in the US?
Well, I can tell you that based on the conversations that I've had, I believe that that's correct. The American population, in my experience, doesn't really care very much about foreign policy in general. We care, and we Americans care very much about affordability in general. And right now, this war is closely connected to a negative trend in affordability, right? That is to say, prices are going up. Rent and gasoline are much too high, and the war is getting blamed for that. I think that's a political fact, and so that's why we're seeing this address right now, because it's beginning to have, really significant political costs. And so, if the president wishes to continue for any period of time and expand it into the potential disaster of a ground war, then he needs to really outline that if he has any hope at all of getting additional support.
Indeed, we're only a couple of minutes away from Donald Trump set to speak at the White House in a prime-time address. In the meantime, Harlan, if I can come back to you, obviously we understand that he is going to talk about NATO allies, and he has been very vocal about his disgust for their lack of action in all of this, basically saying that he's absolutely considering withdrawing the United States from NATO. Whether he can do it or not, how significant is it that a US president is putting that out there in pretty unequivocal terms?
Well, strategically, it's foolish. If one had a sense of humor, we caused the Gulf to be closed, like starting a war with Iran. Had we not done that, the Gulf would be open. And now we want to drag NATO into a war it doesn't want to fight. Article 5 says an attack against one shall be considered an attack against all. That has not happened. So Trump is doing his best to destroy the alliance. As I said, there's legislation that prevents Trump from doing it. But in fairness, Donald Trump's worst weapon is his mouth. And too often things come out from that mouth that he will learn to regret. And I think it would be much, much better if he would consider what he is saying in advance, because he could do an awful lot of damage. He has two bad choices. He can get in or he can get out. And either one is not going to be very, very pleasant. That is the dilemma that he faces tonight.
Richard, you're as we mentioned, the former ambassador to Oman. So with countries like Oman and many of the Gulf states that have been directly affected with, numerous multiple strikes from Iran. What do you think that these countries over the last couple of weeks have been pushing Donald Trump to do? And do you think that they are unified in their message to either bring the war to a close or get some sort of deal?
Well, Oman, of course, over the years, and particularly when it came to the nuclear deal, has been a very effective diplomatic element in our engagement with Iran. Unfortunately, they were performing that role just before this war began, but unfortunately, they have also been struck by Iran as it has reached out to hit all of its neighbors. So I think Oman specifically would like to see this ended through diplomacy. It may be that some of the other Gulf states, now that it has started, want to see it go further so that Iran is really disabled. So there's probably some disunity. But I think in general, it would be best if some kind of diplomatic engagement could be brought to bear to try to bring this to an end.
Obviously, it has just gone 0100 GMT. We are expecting to hear from President Donald Trump from the Oval Office any moment now. And obviously, we will cross to that as soon as he starts speaking. If I can bring you back in once again, David. Obviously, the Strait of Hormuz is vitally important. Can Donald Trump pull out of this without having a deal, without making sure that Iran can't close the Strait of Hormuz again or have control over it in the short to medium term?
I don't think he can. No, I think that Iran assuming control over the international waterway is an unacceptable outcome for just about anybody. He may say he can do it, but oil is a global commodity. Americans track the price of gasoline closer than any other commodity. And if he allows the Iranians control over this, he'll be brought back in. I think he may say he's doing it, but that's basically to try to jibe our traditional partners into action. I don't think it's a realistic possibility.
Okay, we've now got a live shot of President Donald Trump as he begins to make his way to deliver this address. Let's listen in.
Thank you very much. My fellow Americans, good evening. Let me begin by congratulating the team at NASA and our brave astronauts on the successful launch of Artemis 2. It was quite something. It will be traveling further than any manned rocket has ever flown and will very substantially pass the moon, go around it, and come back home from a distance that has never been done before. It's amazing. They are on the way, and God bless them. These are brave people. We want to God bless those 4 unbelievable astronauts. As we speak this evening, it's been just 1 month since the United States military began Operation Epic Fury, targeting the world's #1 state sponsor of terror, Iran. In these past 4 weeks, our armed forces have delivered swift, decisive, overwhelming victories on the battlefield. Victories like few people have ever seen before. Tonight, Iran's Navy is gone. Their Air Force is in ruins. Their leaders, most of them terrorist regime they led, are now dead. Their command and control of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is being decimated as we speak. Their ability to launch missiles and drones is dramatically curtailed, and their weapons factories and rocket launchers are being blown to pieces. Very few of them left. Never in the history of warfare has an enemy suffered such clear and devastating large-scale losses in a matter of weeks. Our enemies are losing, and America, as it has been for 5 years under my presidency, is winning, and now winning bigger than ever before. Before discussing this current situation, I also want to thank our troops for the masterful job they did in taking the country of Venezuela in a matter of minutes. That hit was quick, lethal, violent, and respected by everyone all over the world. After rebuilding our military during my first term, we have by far the strongest military anywhere in the world. And now we're working along with Venezuela and are in a true sense joint venture partners. We're getting along incredibly well in the production and sale of massive amounts of oil and gas, the second largest reserves on earth after the United States of America. We're now totally independent of the Middle East, and yet we are there to help. We don't have to be there. We don't need their oil. We don't need anything they have, but we're there to help our allies. Tonight, I want to provide an update on the tremendous progress our warriors have made in Iran and discuss why Operation Epic Fury is necessary for the safety of America and the security of the free world. From the very first day I announced my campaign for president in 2015, I have vowed that I would never allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. This fanatical regime has been chanting death to America, death to Israel for 47 years. Their proxies were behind the murder of 241 Americans in the Marine barracks bombing in Beirut, the slaughter of hundreds of our service members with roadside bombs. They were involved in the attack on the USS Cole, and they carried out the countless other heinous acts, including the just horrible, bloody atrocities of October 7th in Israel, something that most people have never seen anything like it. This murderous regime also recently killed 45,000 of their own people who were protesting in Iran. 45,000 dead. For these terrorists to have nuclear weapons would be an intolerable threat. The most violent and thuggish regime on earth would be free to carry out their campaigns of terror, coercion, conquest, and mass murder from behind a nuclear shield. I will never let that happen, and neither should any of our past presidents. This situation has been going on for 47 years and should have been handled long before I arrived in office. I did many things during my 2 terms in office to stop the quest for nuclear weapons by Iran first. And perhaps most importantly, I killed General Qasem Soleimani in my first term. He was an evil genius, brilliant person, a horrible human being, however, the father of the roadside bomb. And he lived just horrible what he did. Iran would have been perhaps in far better, stronger position. He lived, we would have had probably a different conversation tonight. But you know what? We'd still be winning and winning big. And then very importantly, I terminated Barack Hussein Obama's Iran nuclear deal, a disaster. Obama gave them $1.7 billion in cash, green cash, took it out of banks from Virginia, DC, and Maryland, all the cash they had, flew it by airplanes in an attempt to buy their respect and loyalty, but it didn't work. They laughed at our president and went on with their mission to have a nuclear bomb. His Iran deal would have led to a colossal arsenal of massive nuclear weapons for Iran, and they would have had them years ago, and they would have used them. Would have been a different world. There would have been no Middle East and no Israel right now, in my opinion, the opinion of a lot of great experts, had I not terminated that terrible deal. And I was so honored to do it. I was so proud to do it. It was so bad right from the beginning. Essentially, I did what no other president was willing to do. They made mistakes, and I am correcting them. My first preference was always the path of diplomacy, yet the regime continued their relentless quest for nuclear weapons and rejected every attempt at an agreement. For this reason, in June, I ordered a strike on Iran's key nuclear facilities, an Operation Midnight Hammer. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. Those beautiful B-2 bombers performed magnificently. We totally obliterated those nuclear sites. The regime then sought to rebuild their nuclear program at a totally different location, making clear they had no intention of abandoning their pursuit of nuclear weapons. They were also rapidly building a vast stockpile of conventional ballistic missiles and would soon have had missiles that could reach the American homeland, Europe, and virtually any other place on earth. Iran's strategy was so obvious. They wanted to produce as many missiles as possible, and they did, with the longest range possible. And they had some weapons that nobody believed they had. We just learned that out. We took them out. We took them all out so that no one would really dare stop them. And their race for a nuclear bomb, a nuclear weapon like nobody's ever seen before. They were right at the doorstep. For years, everyone has said that Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. But in the end, those are just words if you're not willing to take action when the time comes. As I stated in my announcement of Operation Epic Fury, our objectives are very simple and clear. We are systematically dismantling the regime's ability to threaten America or project power outside of their borders. That means eliminating Iran's navy, which is now absolutely destroyed, hurting their air force and their missile program at levels never seen before, and annihilating their defense industrial base. We've done all of it. Their navy is gone. Their air force is gone. Their missiles are just about used up or beaten. Taken together, these actions will cripple Iran military, crush their ability to support terrorist proxies, and deny them the ability to build a nuclear bomb. Our armed forces have been extraordinary. There's never been anything like it militarily. Everyone is talking about it. And tonight, I'm pleased to say that these core strategic objectives are nearing completion. As we celebrate this progress, we think especially of the 13 American warriors who have laid down their lives in this fight to prevent our children from ever having to face a nuclear Iran. Twice this past month, I have traveled to Dover Air Force Base, and it's been something. I wanted to be with those heroes as they return to American soil, and I was with them and their families, their parents, their wives, their husbands. We salute them, and now we must honor them by completing the mission for which they gave their lives. And every single one of the people, their loved ones said, please, sir, please finish the job, every one of them. And we are going to finish the job, and we're going to finish it very fast. We're getting very close. I want to thank our allies in the Middle East, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, and Bahrain. They've been great, and we will not let them get hurt or fail in any way, shape, or form. Many Americans have been concerned to see the recent rise in gasoline prices here at home. This short-term increase has been entirely the result of the Iranian regime launching deranged terror attacks against commercial oil tankers in neighboring countries that have nothing to do with the conflict. This is yet more proof that Iran can never be trusted with nuclear weapons. They will use them, and they will use them quickly. It would lead to decades of extortion, economic pain, and instability worse than we can ever imagine. The United States has never been better prepared economically to confront this threat. You all know that we built the strongest economy in history. We're going through it right now, the strongest in history. In 1 year, we've taken a dead and crippled country. I hate to say that, but we were a dead and crippled country after the last administration and made it the hottest country anywhere in the world by far, with no inflation, record-setting investments coming into the United States, over $18 trillion, and the highest stock market ever, with 53 all-time record highs in just 1 year. It all positioned us to get rid of a cancer that has long simmered. It's known as the nuclear Iran, and they didn't know what was coming. They've never imagined it. Remember, because of our Drill Baby Drill program, America has plenty of gas. We have so much gas. Under my leadership, we are #1 producer of oil and gas on the planet, without even discussing the millions of barrels that we're getting from Venezuela. Because of the Trump administration's policies, we produce more oil and gas than Saudi Arabia and Russia combined. Think of that, Saudi Arabia and Russia combined. And that number will soon be substantially higher than that. There's no country like us anywhere in the world, and we're in great shape for the future. The United States imports almost no oil through the Hormuz Strait and won't be taking any in the future. We don't need it. We haven't needed it, and we don't need it. We've beaten and completely decimated Iran. They are decimated, both militarily and economically and in every other way. And the countries of the world that do receive oil through the Hormuz Strait must take care of that passage. They must cherish it. They must grab it and cherish it. They can do it easily. We will be helpful, but they should take the lead in protecting the oil that they so desperately depend on. So to those countries that can't get fuel, many of which refuse to get involved in the decapitation of Iran, we had to do it ourselves. I have a suggestion. Number one, buy oil from the United States of America. We have plenty. We have so much. And number two, build up some delayed courage. Should have done it before. Should have done it with us, as we asked. Go to the Strait and just take it, protect it, use it for yourselves. Iran has been essentially decimated. The hard part is done, so it should be easy. And in any event, when this conflict is over, the Strait will open up naturally. It'll just open up naturally. They're going to want to be able to sell oil because that's all they have to try and rebuild. It will resume the flowing and the gas prices will rapidly come back down. Stock prices will rapidly go back up. They haven't come down very much, frankly. They came down a little bit, but they've had some very good days over the last couple of days. We've done actually much better than I thought, but we had to take that little journey to Iran to get rid of this horrible threat. With our historic tax cuts, where people are just now talking about receiving larger refunds than they ever thought possible. They are getting so much more money than they thought. That's from the great big beautiful bill. Our economy is strong and improving by the day, and it will soon be roaring back like never before. It will top the levels that it was a month ago. I've made clear from the beginning of Operation Epic Fury that we will continue until our objectives are fully achieved. Thanks to the progress we've made, I can say tonight that we are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong. In the meantime, discussions are ongoing. Regime change was not our goal. We never said regime change, but regime change has occurred because of all of their original leaders' death. They're all dead. The new group is less radical and much more reasonable. Yet if during this period of time no deal is made, we have our eyes on key targets. If there is no deal, we are going to hit each and every one of their electric generating plants very hard and probably simultaneously. We have not hit their oil, even though that's the easiest target of all, because it would not give them even a small chance of survival or rebuilding. But we could hit it and it would be gone, and there's not a thing they could do about it. They have no anti-aircraft equipment. Their radar is 100% annihilated. We are unstoppable as a military force. The nuclear sites that we obliterated with the B-2 bombers have been hit so hard that it would take months to get near the nuclear dust, and we have it under intense satellite surveillance and control. If we see them make a move, even a move for it, we'll hit them with missiles very hard again. We have all the cards, they have none. It's very important that we keep this conflict in perspective. American involvement in World War I lasted 1 year, 7 months, and 5 days. World War II lasted for 3 years, 8 months, and 25 days. The Korean War lasted for 3 years, 1 month, and 2 days. The Vietnam War lasted for 19 years, 5 months, and 29 days. Iraq went on for 8 years, 8 months, and 28 days. We are in this military operation, so powerful, so brilliant, against one of the most powerful countries for 32 days. And the country has been eviscerated and essentially is really no longer a threat. They were the bully of the Middle East, but they're the bully no longer. This is a true investment in your children and your grandchildren's future. The whole world is watching, and they can't leave the power, strength, and brilliance. They just can't believe what they're seeing. They leave it to your imagination, but they can't believe what they're seeing, the brilliance of the United States military. Tonight, every American can look forward to a day when we are finally free from the wickedness of Iranian aggression and the specter of nuclear blackmail. Because of the actions we have taken, we are on the cusp of ending Iran's sinister threat to America and the world. And I'll tell you, the world is watching. And when we do, when it's all over, the United States will be safer, stronger, more prosperous, and greater than it has ever been before. May God bless the men and women of the United States Armed Forces, and may God bless the United States of America. Thank you very much and good night.
Well, that was US President Donald Trump giving his prime time address at the White House. Just to quickly bring you up to date with some of the top lines out of that address. He said, "We are on track to complete our military objectives shortly. We will hit them incredibly hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Discussions are ongoing," he said. Regime change, he reiterated, was not our goal, but it has happened because we have taken out their leadership completely. He said, if there is no deal, we're going to hit all of their electrical plants simultaneously, but we won't hit their oil. We haven't done that yet. It would give them no chance of surviving as a country. He also went on to say that the core strategic military objectives are nearing completion. We're going to finish the job. We're going to finish it very fast. And he ended with, we have all the cards and they have none. Well, we have our White House chief correspondent, as well as a panel of experts here to dissect and analyse President Donald Trump's speech. Thank you very much for staying with us. I know you're all obviously listening very, very intently to all of that. I'm going to get all four of our guests, before we come to you, Ellen, to just go through and give us 1 or 2 sentences about what stood out to you. David DeRoche, can we begin with you, please?
Sure. So there's 2 things. The first is that he mentioned, he kind of slipped in there that there were unexpected capabilities that Iran had. I expected him to make the case that Iran was a regional threat. He did. But then he said they have stuff that we knew about, but they also had things that we didn't know about. And it's a good thing we found it. So I think that he both is acknowledging a little bit of a surprise, which he doesn't normally do. But I think he's also laying the groundwork for quite possibly a longer campaign than he had originally said. And the second thing, I was taken by the fact that he spoke of the simultaneous attacks on the electricity grids, which is something that has been discussed since the opening of the campaign. But it was interesting that he hasn't mentioned perhaps the reciprocal closure of Iranian ports. And that was something I was looking for.
Okay, we'll get into that in just a moment. Harlan, what stood out for you?
The speech was embarrassing, depressing, incoherent, and full of contradictions. If you take out Iran's oil, you're just going to raise the price of oil and gasoline. I think Iran will be looking at that as a victory speech for them. It was a pity the president could not lay out his case and tell us what he plans to do. Taking out Iran's infrastructure is not the answer. And I'm deeply embarrassed and I'm afraid very, very unhappy with that speech.
Okay, Ellen Fisher, our US chief correspondent, if we can come to you to help dissect everything that we heard there, obviously very significant, but he reiterated what we'd already heard from him over the last few days, that this was going to continue for at least another few weeks.
He says they've had swift and overwhelming victories. They're getting very close to that final victory and set a timescale of somewhere in the region of 2 to 3 weeks for that to be carried out. We were told there was a possibility he might mention ground troops. There was no mention of that. That he himself had said that he was going to be highly critical of NATO. There was some talk of how the allies should now move in and take control of the Strait of Hormuz, but there was no mention of that. He said many of the strategic goals have been achieved, and over the next couple of weeks they were going to continue their bombing. In fact, he said they were going to bomb Iran back to the Dark Ages. He also made the point that he was going to start attacking their energy infrastructure if they didn't come up with a deal. And of course, Donald Trump said in a Truth Social post early on Wednesday that he thought that they were looking for a ceasefire, that had been approached and they had asked for a ceasefire. What is interesting is when he said of the strategic goals, we never looked for regime change, except when he announced this 32 days ago. That was one of the things he talked about. He told the people of Iran it was time to rise up and take control of their government. He was actually talking about regime change. And of course, over the last few days, he's talked about regime change, saying it was important that they were now talking to different people, that the government in Tehran had been replaced with people who were not quite as militant or as radical and were much more intelligent, suggesting that he saw someone there that he could deal with. But this was a very threatening tone to Iran. And it's clear that this operation, Epic Fury, is going to continue for 2 or 3 more weeks. He did touch on the economy. He did talk about about how people were finding prices were much higher. But he said, look, the blame is on Iran, not the fact that he started the war. The blame is on Iran because they've threatened the Strait of Hormuz. If they weren't doing that, then oil would still be flowing. But it's clear that that is something that is preying on his mind. But we were looking for how long does this war take? We think 2 or 3 weeks. How does he get out of it? Not entirely clear. And what happens to the Strait of Hormuz? He seems to be suggesting it's up to other countries to secure that. The United States has done their job. Everyone else should now move in and do theirs.
Yeah, a lack of clarity on many points. Alan, Henry, if I can bring you in here now. Do you agree with what Alan was saying there, that that was an incredibly threatening speech?
It was, and actually, if I can be a bit of a contrarian here, that actually left me with some hope. Normally, Donald Trump's rhetorical style is to be really quite threatening right before there's some sort of a resolution. So I noticed here that he chose not to speak of ground forces and what they might accomplish. That to me was a positive. The threats to civilian infrastructure was also quite striking, as was the assertion that if the shooting stops, if there's a ceasefire, that Hormuz will sort of magically open, right? Because everybody will have a motivation to allow that to occur, including the Iranians. So that to me says that he's still considering the possibility of simply stopping and seeing what everybody else does. I hold that as an actual possibility.
Richard, do you think that that is a viable option, though, for Trump, just to walk away after creating so many issues here without resolving many, if any, of them?
Well, I think he would probably like to be able to do so. But as your other guest had indicated, the issue of the Strait of Hormuz clearly was not addressed. There was no way to ensure that global energy supplies would continue moving through the strait. The idea of us attacking the civilian infrastructure of Iran would be something that would alienate the Iranian people for generations from the U.S. So I think the kinds of things that he's talking about really don't address the issues that concern us and our allies, and that is how we get Iran to change its policies and how we get the oil flowing again and how we wind up this military action. So I think in a sense, the key issues were really not addressed. So I don't think he really helped himself in terms of communicating with the American people.
Okay, Alan, if I can come back to you once again. Obviously, part of this exercise was to speak directly to the American people. That is exactly what a primetime speech is meant to do. How do you think that this is going to be received by them? And do you think that will allay many of their fears, whether it is over oil prices or markets or potentially ground troops going in and putting their lives in danger?
Well, funnily enough, I've just been texting someone and saying, what do you think, how do you think this speech will go down? And he said he should have spent much more time speaking on the economy. To be honest, ordinary people in the middle of America don't care what's happening in the Middle East. They may follow it very tangentially on the news, but it's not something they follow every day in the way that you or I do. And so they want to know what's going to happen to their power prices, what's going to happen to their weekly shop. Is it going to get more expensive? And he should have spent more time on that. And perhaps the fact that he didn't, it was suggested to me, is the fact that he's defensive on this. This was the president who said, 1 year after I take office, your energy bills will be half, gas will be much cheaper, so you'll be able to fill your car more often than you do. And he hasn't delivered on that. Here we are, 14 months since he took office. And so that is a weakness for him, and that's maybe why he didn't spend so much time talking about it. Victories for the military will certainly stir the patriotism in most Americans, but it doesn't help put food on the table. And that is the thing most people will vote about, are concerned about, and want to hear from the president.
Yeah, David, obviously one of the other major issues is the Strait of Hormuz, and it doesn't really seem like there was any plan to try and get the oil flowing through there. In fact, he said in a message to the US allies, build up some delayed courage, go to the Strait and just take it and protect it. Use it for yourselves. The hard part is done. The rest should be easy. It will just open up naturally. What did you make of those comments? And is it really as straightforward and simple as Donald Trump is making out here?
Well, I think that his remarks about attacking the energy grid and the oil infrastructure are directed towards Iran and the requirement to open the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, look, what we have here is not, it's kind of a military problem, but it's really a problem of crisis confidence in the insurance industry, the insurance underwriters. It is so easy and so simple and so low cost to disrupt civilian shipping that, you know, militarily to try to stamp that out is very, very hard to do. The only way you can really do it is by deterrence. So I think that a lot of that big stick, a lot of that threat was basically telling Iran, hey, you know, you guys stop this, you're going to get something you really don't want. On the other hand, as I foreshadowed his remarks, I think he does want to get the coalition or build a coalition of America's traditional partners. He speaks imprecisely. I think when he says NATO, he doesn't mean the organization in Belgium. He includes like Japan and Australia in that. He means our partners. And he wants them to do more, both to relieve the burden on U.S. forces and also politically, so that he can then turn to the domestic audience and say, look, I brought the world with us. America's in its natural leadership role.
Ellen, if I can come back to you once again, just on the US allies and the messaging that Trump put forth in talking about NATO and whether that means it's a wider alliance. I mean, those are some extremely tough words. Basically, the US has done everything so far, and it's now up to the rest of you to sort it out. He didn't, though, talk directly about the NATO alliance, because in the lead up to it, we had heard him multiple times denouncing the organisation, potentially pulling out of the alliance.
Well, a couple of things. He can't. I mean, he can't pull out of the NATO alliance unilaterally. He would have to get 2/3 of the Senate to agree. That's a thing that was introduced in the Senate in 2023. And actually, the senator that introduced it is now his Secretary of State, to stop any president unilaterally drawing the United States out of one of the oldest military alliances in the world. He's goading, he's trying to goad his allies into doing something in the Strait of Hormuz, saying, look, we've got plenty of oil. We don't need to come through the Strait of Hormuz. But it's clearly something that has concerned them. And it also, as someone has pointed out to me, shows a lack of strategy. We were told that, of course, they knew that the Iranians would target the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, they knew they would make that a choke point. And of course, they had something that they could help to deal with it. But as it goes on day after day after day, it proves that actually the United States doesn't. They don't know quite how to handle this. And so for all the military planning that's going on, that's not something that seems to have been top of mind. It's not something that they thought would be a serious threat. And so Donald Trump trying to goad his rivals into helping the rest of the world, there is some truth in the fact that the United States is not dependent on the oil that comes through there. But they also need other things that comes through there. They need things like agriculture, fertilizer that comes through there. They also need things like rare earth minerals that come through there. So it's not just oil that passes through there. There are many other things, and that hits the US economy. So while he says that the US could walk away, they really can, and they've got to help get the Strait of Hormuz open again if they're to see, if they're not to see a long-term impact on the United States economy.
Okay, President Trump addressed Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz by saying other countries should take advantage of US strikes on Iran and come and take the oil there, while also adding that the strait will open up on its own.
The countries of the world that do receive oil through the Hormuz Strait must take care of that passage. They must cherish it. They must grab it and cherish it. They can do it easily. We will be helpful, but they should take the lead in protecting the oil that they so desperately depend on. So to those countries that can't get fuel, many of which refuse to get involved in the decapitation of Iran, we had to do it ourselves. I have a suggestion. Number one, buy oil from the United States of America. We have plenty. We have so much. And number two, build up some delayed courage. Should have done it before. Should have done it with us, as we asked. Go to the strait and just take it, protect it, use it for yourselves. Iran has been essentially decimated. The hard part is done, so it should be easy. And in any event, when this conflict is over, the strait will open up naturally. It'll just open up naturally.
Okay, we're going to go back to our panel of experts now. Henry, if I can bring you in to discuss what we heard from Donald Trump there, basically putting the burden now on US allies that need the oil to go through the Strait of Hormuz. Go in and take it. What did you make of that? And given what we have heard from so many of them and their disdain, not their disdain, their rejection of getting involved in this conflict, that is highly unlikely to happen.
Well, I think sooner or later, their pragmatism will overcome their sense of upset at not having been consulted before the war started. And they will recognize that they have a higher stake in the security of the Strait of Hormuz than the U.S. does. I think that's a fact. So I suspect that ultimately, sometime in the next couple of weeks, there will form a coalition. There will be some kind of an arrangement with Iran, and the strait will move toward reopening again. Everybody needs it to reopen. Everybody is, including Iran, is just trying to get the best possible deal. You know, Iran has already amply demonstrated, for the reasons cited by one of the other panelists, that it controls the Strait of Hormuz and it can turn it on and off anytime it wants. I will say that if the U.S. stops shooting at Iran, then the pressure will shift to Iran to do the same thing. And all the international pressure being focused on the U.S. will be somewhat shifted to Iran. And then finally, I just wanted to point out, you know what? Iran is not going to change. And it's good, I guess, that the president thinks that the current leadership, whoever that is more reasonable. But the Iranian empire has been roughly the same and is engaged in the same type of behavior literally for thousands of years. And I actually think it's possible that these guys who were raised up in the very ideological, fanatical Iranian Islamic Republic are going to be worse than the previous guys, except maybe more competent. So not so optimistic on that front, if I may say.
Not as optimistic as Trump was in that speech. Richard, if I can bring you in on all of this now, just on the fact that Trump seems to believe that he'll be able to walk away from the Strait of Hormuz and it will sort itself out. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, I think it's very clear that the American public has learned a great deal about the Strait of Hormuz in the last month. And it is true that the American public understands that the U.S. does not get much oil or gas, for that matter, from the Strait, although American farmers are very aware that they get most of their fertilizer coming through the Strait. But Americans also have seen that disruptions of energy coming through the Strait has caused U.S. energy costs to go through the roof. So there is a connection between the Strait being closed and the cost to Americans. So even if President Trump wants to say that whether the Strait is open or closed is indifferent to us, the American people realize that's not the case. But I think along with what Henry was saying, if we can get to some kind of a ceasefire and end to the hostilities, then I do think we will get to the point where something can be arranged to allow shipping again through the Strait. But the wild card might be Israel, because Israel has indicated that it has other goals that it is still seeking, so that even if the U.S. declares that its goals are met, it's not clear that Israel will agree that its goals are met.
Indeed. We'll get to Israel in just a moment, David, but if I can just keep talking about this. Has anything actually changed with President Trump's speech? I mean, he didn't announce any ground troops. There was no coalition, announcement to go in and take control of the Strait of Hormuz. His timeline is effectively the same as what he's been saying over the last few days.
Yeah, no, he didn't announce any initiative, but he is speaking, to three audiences. So to the American public, which is very impatient when it comes to wars, we expect our wars to be quick, successful, and bloodless on our side, at least. To them, he said, "We're making progress. We're going to achieve our aims. We're dealing with a difficult problem that." Every president for the last 50 years hasn't faced up to. Only I have the guts to do it. To the Iranians, he said, "You've had your fun. We have a lot more where this came from, and we have been holding back. If you don't come around, you're going to get something you really don't want." And then to the Europeans, he basically Europeans, our allies and partners, he said, you guys need to get in the game too. Don't expect us to solve all your problems for you. You didn't have the guts to solve the security problem. We're taking care of that. But the economic problems are yours, not really ours, and you're going to have to deal with it yourself.
I just want to highlight something else that President Trump said. He again claimed that the deaths of Iranian leaders constituted a change to the country's regime and reiterated his threat against Iran's civilian electrical network if Iran does not make a deal with the US. Here's what he said on that.
Regime change was not our goal. We never said regime change, but regime change has occurred because of all of their original leaders' death. They're all dead. The new group is less radical and much more reasonable. Yet if during this period of time no deal is made, we have our eyes on key targets. If there is no deal, we are going to hit each and every one of their electric generating plants very hard and probably simultaneously.
Henry, if I can come back to you on this, I think I saw you shaking your head as you were listening to Donald Trump's comments there. What did you make of that?
Look, I'm not sure where he's getting the idea that the successor generation is going to be less radical. I think it's far more likely that they'll be more radical, and also in a transition moment like the Iranian regime is experiencing right now, it's the more radical who tend to win out. Because if somebody wants to argue that, it's time to make a deal with the Americans, that person will be immediately called out and brutalized and possibly killed as a traitor. Therefore, in Iranian political terms, I suspect it's far better for survival purposes to be more extreme right now, which will make it more difficult, I think, to get to a deal and will, I think, drive them to move faster to reestablish their position when the war does in fact end. So sorry for the head shaking, but that's where that's what strikes me. The idea that these guys are going to, come up and be reasonable and see the light, that's the least likely outcome. Hey, these guys just murdered 40,000 of their own people back in January, had no problem doing that. So that's what they are.
Okay, Harlan, if I can bring you in, can bring you in on this. I know I can see you wanting to jump in. What do you have to add?
Well, first of all, the Strait of Hormuz is not exactly closed. What you may not know is the Majlis just approved a plan called the Hormuz tax. I wrote a column last week saying, how do you open the strait? It'll be about $1 trillion. So I think what's going to happen is that there'll be some kind of agreement. There are already talks with Pakistan and India who are allowing their ships to get through. So I think there are going to be payoffs. But I think something else that we need to realize, Trump's speech was remarkably fact-free. He talked about how brilliantly the military did, and the military did. But compared to Desert Storm in 1991 and Iraqi freedom in 2003, our military did far, far better. So the comparisons are really not, to me, seemingly worthwhile. There is no existential threat. Iran was a long way from making long-range rockets. And even though they had 60% enriched uranium and possibly 900 pounds, they were not very, very close to making a bomb. And even if they did, the bombs would be too massive to be able to be transported. I think that the issue here is that Trump is probably paving his way for an extrication strategy. But one thing I will say is virtually certain. Iran will develop a nuclear weapon over time. And this is causing an existential problem from Israel. The dilemma that we faced was that our engagement in Iran, in my mind, was not existential. It is existential for Israel. So what is Israel going to do now that it seems to me inevitable? Whether it takes 10 or 20 years, Iran is very likely to develop a bomb. Even if we back out, what does the Israelis do? That's going to be a major point of contention, which I do not have a very good answer as to how to solve.
No. Richard, if I can bring you in on this point, obviously many countries around the world will be watching very closely Donald Trump's remarks. No doubt, no one closer than Benjamin Netanyahu. How do you think that he is going to assess Trump speaking there, and what will worry him most?
Well, I think the potential that Trump would make a decision to end U.S. military engagement is something that he would not want to see, because it seems clear that Israel wants to continue to do a lot more military damage to Iran. I think, in fact, Israel would be more prepared than the U.S. to really begin to strike critical infrastructure in order to really set back Iran's ability to recover and to reconstitute any of its military activity. That's not something the U.S. has wanted to do. So we'll have to see if Israel does take that kind of course, in particular, if President Trump does end our military engagement, say, in the next couple of weeks. So I don't think he was probably pleased to see the idea that we might be standing down. There was no mention of ground forces. So in that sense, it doesn't seem like it would be the kind of speech that would cause him to feel like the U.S. is going to stay in this for the longer haul to help Israel reach its goals.
Yeah, David, if I can bring you in on this, how aligned do you think that the U.S. and Israel are on what still needs to be achieved here?
Well, I think militarily, the U.S. and Israel are pretty much in lockstep. But I think politically, as Ambassador Schmierer said, there are different political objectives here. I think it might be instructive to look at the case of Syria, where once the Bashar al-Assad regime fell, the United States just said, okay, there's a new guy. Let's find a way to work with him. Israel, on the other hand, said, yeah, this guy may be a good guy, he may not be a good guy, but, you know, he's just one guy. And they launched on a protracted campaign to ensure they destroyed, you know, any aircraft, any artillery piece they could find to ensure that Syria would never, in the near future, pose a threat to Israel. I think we'll see the same thing in Iran. I think that President Trump is content to do what he said, which is just remove Iran's ability to reach out and harass and attack its neighbors. And then I think he has confidence that maximum pressure and economic power will lead to a lasting regime change from within Iran. Israel doesn't want to wait for that. I think they want to get rid of the regime on their own. So we don't have a schism yet, but once military success is achieved, I think we'll see one.
Okay, we're going to bring in Rob McBride now. He's been following developments for us from the Jordanian capital, Amman. Rob, can you just, first of all, give us an idea how you think and how the Israelis will perceive Donald Trump's comments tonight?
Yeah, I think reaction will be fairly mixed from Israel. I think one of the main concerns going into this was all of the talk about some sort of back channel deal or even a ceasefire suddenly being declared. That was of real concern to Benjamin Netanyahu, to the Israeli coalition in government at the moment, that the US allies might suddenly declare a ceasefire. There would be all sorts of pressure then on Israel to do likewise. Even worse for Israel would be that if some sort of deal had been done, there may have been some condition placed on the ceasefire coming into effect, or some deal coming into effect, which was meant to protect Hezbollah, that Israel would have to give up its gaining momentum offensive in southern Lebanon, which in some respects is now more of its focus as it looks ahead, as it looks to directing its resources, which aren't limitless, into southern Lebanon rather than Iran itself. So there is, I suppose, a slight relief that they're not talking about any ceasefire, that for the next couple of weeks at least, the US is talking about continuing this intensive air campaign. That seems to fit with Israel's timetable. We heard from Netanyahu a few days ago in an interview with a US network that he was in his reckoning just over halfway through their list of targets. Other spokespeople for the Israeli military have said that they're into the conclusion phase. They've only got a few days to go, but 2 weeks of an intensive air campaign would seem to fit with Israel's timetable as it stands at the moment. What happens after that, if there is some kind of agreement that might require Israel to desist, to pull back, to stop its attacks on Iran under US pressure, well, that's another concern. But for the next couple of weeks at least, so far so good.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Rob McBride, for us in Amman. We're going to go to Mohammed Val, who is in Tehran for us. And as we heard, Donald Trump repeated his threats to strike Iran's energy infrastructure if it did not reach a deal. Is that likely, though, these latest threats likely to get Iran to negotiate?
Well, the likelihood that this is going to force the Iranians to negotiate is slim, I think, because none of what he said tonight is new to the Iranians. The same threats, the same types of ideas and rhetoric against Iran. That's what he said in this speech tonight. And for Iranians, there is nothing, almost nothing new in this speech. And for them, they will continue also the same type of rhetoric. They will continue to focus on the military defense, on the military retaliations, and they will continue to say that there are no negotiations because none of what he said tonight is going to encourage them to change their stance towards this war. To the contrary, I think the leaders here will say, look, this is what we told you. There is nothing that he is going to put on the table of anything concrete and tangible for the Iranians to make them change the way they are approaching this war. And I think that's what the leaders here are going to say regarding this speech. There is no offer there on the table. There is no new offer except that call for a deal, which is unclear to the Iranians because they haven't seen any willingness to compromise on the part of the Americans regarding the 5 demands by the Iranians and those 15 points by the Americans. The gap is still very wide between the two sides. And there is no revelation for Iranians in this speech. There is the same rhetoric, the same threats to bomb Iran back into the Stone Age where Iran belongs. That's going to be very vexing to the leaders here and to also a cross-section of the Iranian people who are not necessarily against or pro-government because the majority of Iranians will be fearing the consequences of what Trump said tonight if he's going to follow it with action, if he's going to obliterate the water and particularly the energy facilities. That's going to punish the entire 90 million Iranians. And those who have had some expectation or hope that this war is going to liberate them, tonight they will think again about their convictions. And they will say, no, this is something that is going to touch us, our families, our children, our future. This discourse, the discourse contained in this speech tonight is going to be used by Iranian leaders to say to the Iranian people, look, you don't have anything to hope for from the Americans at this stage.
Thank you so much for that update, Mohammed Val, for us with the view from Tehran. Well, US President Donald Trump said the next 2 weeks of attacks on Iran will be severe.
Thanks to the progress we've made, I can say tonight that we are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong.
Okay, I'm going to bring our guests back in. David, if I can come back to you on this, what is there left for the US and Israel to actually hit? Because in the hours before Donald Trump spoke, we heard from Central Command, US Central Command, that there had been 13,000 combat flights and that hit 12,000 targets.
Yeah, good question. So some targets need to be hit several times, but you're right. You hit on one of the problems with aerial bombardment. At one point in the Korean War, the Air Force commander was asked, what can you do to help us? And he said, I can make the rubble bounce. We're not at that point yet. A lot of the attacks have been directed against regime officials who are moving targets. And of course, Iran is a modern state. So if one person is killed, another person moves up and then he can become targeted. We've also seen an evolution from the tactical necessity of destroying the air defense network. And President Trump made a point of saying that the air defense network is history, and I think he's correct on that, towards ballistic missile sites, storage sites, moving up the supply chain for ballistic missiles to things like the factories that make the motors, the warheads, to the steel mills that make the bodies of the missiles, things of that nature. Right. So there are still a number of targets. Increasingly, you get towards dual use technology, a factory that produces a military product but also produces a civilian product. That's where it starts to get problematic. But we haven't yet seen extensive counter value targeting where you get at just purely economic targets like the fuel infrastructure, the way Iran has targeted the GCC states.
Okay, Harlan, we've got a couple of minutes left of this discussion. What will you be looking at to happen over the next couple of weeks? And how dangerous is it if after 2 or 3 more weeks of this bombing campaign, the US walks away?
Let me make 3 points. First, there are a large number of underground factories that make drones and missiles that have not been touched. And Central Command has not necessarily been candid about that. About the Iranian Air Force and Navy, it really didn't have one. The Iranians were still flying F-14 Tomcats that Tom Cruise flew in the first Maverick movie. Second, Trump did not mention talks. Remember how positive he was that talks were making great progress. The fact that he made no mention is probably going to alienate the diehard MAGA base who said, you promised no wars. What were you doing about this? And if I had to make a guess, by week's end, oil will be $120 a barrel. That will mark the success or failure of Trump's attempt to sell the American people on the war through this speech tonight.
Okay. Henry, just very quickly before we go, your final thoughts. When the US do pull out, what sort of mess do you expect them to leave behind?
Big one. You're going to have a really very angry Iranian regime to deal with. If the Israelis succeed in getting what they want, you have a high potential for chaos in that landmass, which none of the neighbors want. And that's why I actually think the Pakistanis are so deeply involved, because they know that Iran is an empire and it can come unglued. And then secondly, or lastly, I guess I would say, quite right. The Iranians have nuclear ambitions now. They've learned if you don't want to be invaded, get the bomb.
Okay, David, Harlan, Henry, and Richard, we'll leave it there. But thank you so much. We really do appreciate your time as well as your insight. Thanks again. We are going to take a very short break now. Just stay with us, though. Our extensive coverage of the conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran continues in a couple of minutes at the top of the hour.
The latest news as it breaks.
A Russian oil tanker is on its way to Cuba carrying something like 670,000 barrels of desperately needed fuel.
With detailed coverage.
We have been hearing a number of gunshots by the Israeli military, and this is another explosion very close to where people are living.
From around the world.
Many have told us that they're here to take a stand against what they call the politics of hate and division.
That would precipitate an attack against American forces.
To prevent Iran from getting nukes.
There is no coherent strategy, and you can see that's reflected in the media coverage.
Many American media see it like a video game. From the graphics on the screen to who they speak to, war for them is big business.
We saw this exact same pattern happen in Gaza, the same lazy, flattened reporting that we saw in Gaza when it comes to the war on Iran.
The Listening Post decodes the media on Al Jazeera.
On counting the cost,
The Middle East conflict has cut off 20% of the world's oil and gas supply. Countries are scrambling for alternatives. Many are moving to expand coal output. Others are turning to nuclear power and renewables. But will governments be able to make up for the energy shortfall? Counting the cost on Al Jazeera.
Hello, I'm Tom McRae. This is Al Jazeera with our continuing coverage of the war between the US, Israel and Iran. Coming up in his address to the nation, US President Donald Trump says he is very close to completing the objectives in Iran, but warns of more attacks.
We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong.
The Iranian president sends a letter to the American people saying his country has no hostility towards the people of the US, Europe or its neighbours. Israel under fire, Iranian missile strike near Tel Aviv, injuring 4 people and damaging water systems.
3, 2, 1. Booster ignition and lift off.
And in other news, the first crewed mission to circle the moon in more than half a century blasts off from Florida with 4 astronauts on board. Donald Trump says the US has nearly completed its core strategic objectives in its war on Iran. In his first primetime address to the American public since the conflict started over a month ago, he vowed to attack Iran relentlessly in the coming weeks while claiming it is no longer a threat.
Thanks to the progress we've made, I can say tonight that we are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong.
Well, earlier, President Donald Trump said Iran has asked for a ceasefire, but Iranian officials have told Al Jazeera those diplomatic conversations have not taken place and deny asking for a ceasefire despite Trump's claims. In a letter addressed to the American people, Iran's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, says the Iranian people harbour no hostility towards the American people, Europe or neighbouring countries. But the letter says Trump's threat to attack Iranian vital infrastructure would be a war crime, and such actions carry consequences that extend far beyond Iran's borders. We're covering all of these latest developments from Tehran, Amman, as well as Washington, D.C., where our chief US correspondent, Ellen Fisher, has been standing by at the White House. Ellen, after Donald Trump's speech, what has changed?
Nothing. What we heard was essentially a rehash of what we've heard over the last couple of weeks through interviews and also through social media posts. He didn't talk in any great length about the thing that concerns most Americans, which is the economy. And again, for Donald Trump, it was full of contradictions. While he's often said how this isn't a war against the Iranian people, he's talking about how over the next 2 or 3 weeks, he's going to bomb Iran back to the Stone Age. He talks about how we were never after regime change, but on the day he announced Operation Epic Fury, he talked about how he wanted to see the Iranian people rise up and overthrow their government. He's talked about how there is a 4 to 6 week window. He's talking about core objectives being achieved sometime in the next 2 to 3 weeks. He has been talking since March the 9th about how the war is effectively over, how there's very few things left to bomb. And of course, we were told, and Donald Trump himself gave an interview a few hours ago saying that he was going to be very critical of NATO. He didn't actually mention NATO at all. He talked about the countries that need to use the Strait of Hormuz for oil and how they should go in and take over that part of the world. But of course, the United States needs the Strait of Hormuz, maybe not for oil because it is largely self-sufficient now, but it needs it for agricultural produce like fertilizer. It needs it for rare earth minerals, things that are essential to the American economy. So people at home will be wondering, how is this war actually making my life better? And a lot of people will think, not very much. So Donald Trump really set a bar where he was going to be critical of NATO, talk about how long the war was going to take and how they would get out. He managed to talk about possibly ending the war in 2 to 3 weeks. He says they've achieved most of their strategic objectives, but he still hasn't made clear just exactly what he would regard as a success, but he's already claiming victory.
Indeed. Ellen, this primetime address was also a way for him to speak directly to the American people about the war, and we've discussed at length the repercussions on the US economy and the cost of living as well. How is this going to be received by the American public, and do you think that he got his message through to them?
Well, look, people who support Donald Trump are going to think this was a wonderful speech and that he did really well. And I'm seeing that already reflected in social media. The United States population of 320 million people. Pick your response that you're going to get. But overall, people will regard this, I suspect, as not the speech they thought they were going to get, that it wasn't critical of NATO, that it didn't lay out how he was going to help people in the short term. He talked about how this was an investment for the future, for your children and your grandchildren, because Iran will no longer be able to threaten Americans or America or indeed the rest of the world. But some of the allies will be wondering where this goes now, how this plays out over the next 2 to 3 weeks. And also there's the question mark over the peace talks that apparently Pakistan is mediating. If Donald Trump is serious about bombing Iran back to the Stone Age, is he trying to make it so that Iran must agree to everything that the United States suggests? And we've heard that from the administration in the past. And we've also heard from Tehran that is highly unlikely. And so it seems that Donald Trump wanted a primetime address to speak to the American people, but he didn't actually speak to the American people. He spoke to his MAGA base, and he needs a lot more than that to convince people who are suffering in this economy that things are going to get better soon.
Okay, thanks so much for all of that, Ellen. Our chief US correspondent, Ellen Fisher at the White House. I'm going to bring you more of the Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian's letter addressing the American people. In it, he says attacking Iran's vital infrastructure, including energy and industrial facilities, is a direct attack on the Iranian people. Well, beyond constituting a war crime, such actions carry consequences that extend far beyond Iran's borders. Is America First truly among the priorities of the US government today? Went on to say the choice between confrontation and engagement is both real and consequential. Its outcome will shape the future for generations to come. I'm going to bring in Mohammed Val now, who is in Tehran for us. And Mohammed, as dawn breaks there in the capital, how is President Trump's speech likely to be viewed?
Well, Tom, it's likely to be viewed as nothing new. For Iranians, nothing new has been said in that speech, and they are going to see it as a vindication of the approach they are taking towards this war and towards dealing with the Americans. It's full of threats. It's full of talking about bombing Iran back to the Stone Age where it belongs. And that's contradictory to what Donald Trump has been saying about regime change has been achieved. And now we have people in charge who are better and more amenable to talk to. Those are two things that don't go together. And also, he didn't say much about the negotiations, the progress that he has talked about over the last few days, saying that the 15 points, most of them were actually accepted by the Iranians and that a deal is very close at hand. All of that has disappeared in this speech, and it is focused mainly on more warfare and more bombing of Iran and the obliteration of its infrastructure, and also that threat about the standing threat about destroying the power facilities. That's not going to go down well, not only with the government here, but also with the people who don't want to see their country destroyed and their livelihood, particularly their livelihood, destroyed through those threats.
Yeah, Mohammed, as you talk about all of these threats, they're all designed to try and get Iran to come to the negotiating table to get some sort of deal over the next few weeks. How likely or unlikely is that?
Well, we can only say what the Iranians are reiterating every single day. They're not very much impressed by the offers from Washington because they don't believe in them and they don't think that the Americans are serious about negotiations or about reaching a deal. So far, they have not. They say they have not even yet responded to the 15 points of the American side, and they have not even submitted their own points. So that means there is no preparation going on for those negotiations, despite the fact that the Pakistanis are doing their best, and also some other countries in the region are trying to help with that. But the Iranians they're not expecting, from what they say, they're not expecting these negotiations actually to start anytime soon. What they expect is more bombing, just as the American president has said, and what they are preparing for that by way of retaliation or response is more missiles on Israel, more missiles on the region. That's the understanding here in Islamabad, in Tehran, and there is no expectation that anything good is going to come from the efforts in Islamabad, even though they trust the Pakistanis, but they don't trust the other side, the Americans and the Israelis.
Okay, thanks so much, Mohammed, for all of that. Mohammed Val in Tehran. We're going to go to Rob McBride, who's been following developments from the Jordanian capital, Amman. And the war is obviously going to continue, as we heard from Donald Trump, for at least the next couple of weeks. How's that going to be received in Israel?
Yeah, I think Israel will be generally happy with the content of this address. There have been growing concerns with talk about some sort of ceasefire suddenly being declared, of America walking away from this conflict, announcing possibly that some sort of deal had been done through these back channels. As remote as that now seems, there were growing concerns in Israel about those things. And what that would mean, would Israel be called upon to stop its air attacks? Even worse for Israel, would one of the conditions of any agreement or peace talks be that it stops its growing attacks into southern Lebanon, targeting Hezbollah? None of that seems to have transpired for the next couple of weeks, at least. We are going to see this air campaign continuing, possibly intensifying, and that seems to fit in with Israel's plans. We've heard from Netanyahu in the last couple of days that, in his estimation, Israel is only just over halfway through its targeting list. So an extra 2 weeks of an intensive bombing campaign would seem to fit in with Israel's plans. And its list, as we know, has been expanding to look at the wider infrastructure of Iran, of its economy, of its society, all the things that make a society work, to broaden those list of targets, to leave Iran at the end of this, whatever becomes in the future, whatever regime is left in place in Tehran, to leave it completely weakened, that it would be decimated and take years to rebuild. Indeed, in Israel's view, as in Trump's words, to leave it back in the Stone Age.
And at the same time, Rob, there's been a significant increase in Iranian strikes on Israel. Can you just talk us through exactly what damage and injuries they've caused?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, these attacks continue. In fact, just in the last few minutes, we got word that there's been another alert raised in northern Israel, and a missile launch has been detected coming from Iran. Earlier this Thursday morning, in the early hours, there was another missile attack that caused fairly extensive damage through central and northern Israel, with around about 11 strikes from missiles that were launched, especially around the city of Bnei Barak. But this is following on a pattern that we've seen throughout Wednesday, multiple missile strikes. In fact, according to the Israeli authorities, this last day has been about as intensive an aerial barrage, a missile barrage, as we've had since the early days of this conflict began. There has, in the last week or so, been a slight dip in the numbers of missiles being launched. That's led to speculation that potentially Iran is being exhausted of its longer range ballistic missiles, but there has been an uptick in the last day or so. That's presumably the timing of that is no coincidence. It has been ahead of this speech, but also has seemed to be timed with the Passover, which has just begun, and seemed to coincide with the traditional meals that people come together and as families in Israel to begin on a Wednesday evening to cause as much disruption as possible. And for Israelis, it seems to just confirm the fact that that Iran still poses a threat that it has to deal with by force.
Okay, thank you so much for all of that, Rob. Rob McBride for us there in Amman. Well, in his address to the nation, President Trump said Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz by saying other countries should take advantage of US strikes on Iran and come and take the oil there, while also adding that the strait will open up on its own.
The countries of the world that do receive oil through the Hormuz Strait must take care of that passage. They must cherish it. They must grab it and cherish it. They can do it easily. We will be helpful, but they should take the lead in protecting the oil that they so desperately depend on. So to those countries that can't get fuel, many of which refuse to get involved in the decapitation of Iran, we had to do it ourselves. I have a suggestion. Number one, buy oil from the United States of America. We have plenty. We have so much. And number two, build up some delayed courage. Should have done it before. Should have done it with us, as we asked. Go to the strait and just take it, protect it, use it for yourselves. Iran has been essentially decimated. The hard part is done, so it should be easy. And in any event, when this conflict is over, the strait will open up naturally. It'll just open up naturally.
Joining me now from Washington, D.C. is David DeRoche. He is a professor at Thayer Marshall Institute and a former Pentagon director of Arabian Peninsula Affairs. And we're also joined by Henry Enscher from San Diego. He's a former U.S. ambassador and deputy assistant secretary of state. Thank you so much for staying with us here on Al Jazeera. David, if I can bring you in first. Donald Trump there saying the hard part is done, the rest will be easy. From a military standpoint, if other countries were to get involved in trying to take control of the Strait of Hormuz, how difficult is that actually going to be?
Well, I suppose the hard part in terms of facing massed fires from ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, that probably has been done. The real threat, I think, in the Strait of Hormuz is of even a relatively small missile or a speedboat attack with explosives on it would create a lot of damage to civilian ship, and it requires a lot of vigilance to do that. There's also the threat of naval mines, which many European countries are better at than the United States, but they're better at it, but nobody is good at it. And so, I suppose technically he's correct, but in order to achieve our goals in the Strait of Hormuz, it has to be as placid as a shopping center parking lot. And it's very easy and very low effort for the Iranians to disrupt it. All they have to do is make insurance clerks in London nervous.
Henry, if I can bring you in now. If we take Donald Trump's speech as a whole, has anything changed since he spoke?
Yeah, nothing. Honestly, just absolutely zero. This felt to me like a situation where his advisors talked him into doing it. And so he went out and did it. But it doesn't really mean very much in terms of advancing the ball.
Does that weaken him?
If you don't mind, I'll stop.
Sorry, just very quickly. Does that weaken him?
I don't think it changes the situation much because his base is with him, although his base is getting smaller, right? And as the price of oil, price of gasoline continues to go up and all the other effects start to drive in on the American economy, I believe it will weaken him. And that may or may not stop him from doing more of what he wants in Iran. Could I mention here, I think a driver that may cause him to change the directions here somewhat is the upcoming meetings. I don't think he's going to want to have this war going on with King Charles in the U.S. And, he already delayed the meeting with the Chinese leader once. He's not going to want to do that again. So I think that this is an expression of outrage and a strong push to the allies with a view toward going toward the exits. And we saw this in Donald Trump's negotiations with the Taliban. When he decided he wanted to leave, that was it. He was leaving.
David, if that is the case and the US just pulls out and leaves everything in a state of flux as it is at this point in time, how dangerous is that?
Well, it's pretty dangerous. I mean, I suppose that our partners would basically have to pay tribute to Iran.
What do you mean by that?
Export. Well, Iran is charging $2 million for a ship to traverse the Strait of Hormuz, which are international waters. So if the United States is not there to basically punish Iran for trying to do that, then I think their only option, they don't have the military ability to land forces the way that the United States might be able to do it. They don't have the deterrence capacity that the United States has. So I think they just pay up. And obviously that would be a huge damage to American prestige in the region. And I think that it would handicap us for a long.
As if they're having to pay $2 million for Hormuz. Henry, what lasting damage do you think is going to be done here to the US alliances with the UK, Europe, as well as other countries, Asian countries like Japan and South Korea, as well as Australia and New Zealand?
Well, it'll be interesting to see the extent to which this pushes them, to greater self-reliance on the one hand, but on the other, to also look for alternatives, right? I think it's just as likely that the Europeans, and on the one hand, will have to deal with Russia at some point, although Russia's been greatly weakened.
We appreciate your subscription. This broadcast is shifting to our horizontal feed only and no longer in shorts. You can still watch on your phones anywhere in the world, but tap the notification bell now. Otherwise, you might miss us when we go live with The Truth.
Become a channel member today to receive a gift from Morning Mic Drop on Truth Talks Live. Tap in for real news where your voice matters.
Catch our morning news updates every day at 6 a.m. to 12 noon on Truth Talks.
But recalculation is possible.
Where does this leave Iran's new leaders, David? Does this leave them in a stronger position than they were before the speech? Basically, Donald Trump saying we're going to try and hit you as hard as we can over the next few weeks, which he's been doing for the last month anyway. And if we can't get a deal, then we're going to walk away.
Well, my own theory is that when you have an authoritarian state and you pressure it, the hardliners get a bigger piece of a shrinking pie. And I think that basically what we have are more hardliners in power. I think that it is a fair criticism to say that some of the people who've been killed are the natural people we would be negotiating with. But there is a sunny side here. There's been a decades-long argument in U.S. foreign policy over whether there actually is such a thing as an empowered moderate in Iran, or whether these are just Yankee wranglers, people designed to distract us while all the real power is with the Revolutionary Guard anyhow. So, only Nixon could go to China. And if you want to have a lasting deal with Iran, and President Trump's autobiography was not entitled The Art of Coercive Military Power to Produce an Optimal Result. It was the art of the deal. If you want to have a lasting deal, you got to make it with somebody who can keep the deal. And it probably is not all these people who come here and say, oh, yes, I have a doctorate degree in a German philosophy from the university in Scotland. It's the Revolutionary Guard. So maybe we are closer to a deal.
Henry, obviously in the lead up to this speech, everyone had been really hanging on. There was a lot of anticipation about what he could say or do. Like you say, not much has changed since he spoke. So what are we going to be looking for over the next couple of weeks?
I'm inclined to say more of the same until President Trump just decides that that's enough, that he's now far enough down the slope of diminishing returns so that he's willing to just stop. I think that is the most likely outcome at this point. There can always be a black swan, right? Something really awful could happen in the Gulf. something really awful could happen to our forces deployed there, or the president could decide to use some of those forces, and again, something really awful could happen. So I actually think walking away within the next 2 weeks or so is the most likely outcome. Then some sort of a deal with the Iranians, whoever the Iranians are. And then finally, the least likely is something really awful has the effect of lengthening the war.
Okay, David, if I can just bring you in for one final question. Obviously, all of the Gulf states have been directly impacted since the beginning of this war, with Iranian missiles and drones being targeted right across the Gulf states. How do you think that they will be viewing Donald Trump's comments, and where does it leave them if the US does walk away in a few weeks?
Well, if the U.S. walks away and leaves an angry Iran in place that still has the ability to affect them, that's kind of the worst case scenario. That's poking the bear and then saying, "Oh well, you got a problem with your bear. I'm out of here." In my times talking with Gulf leaders since the start of the war, I observed a discrete shift in opinion. Originally, it was, "You guys have started this war, and it's bleeding over into us." But as the Iranian attacks on Gulf civilian infrastructure continued and expanded, I think that people were like, "Oh my gosh, you're right. Iran really is a regional threat that can't be placated." And I think that they expect the United States and Israel to really eliminate Iran as a threat. And since they said they were going to do that, if they don't do that, there's a real problem there. It leaves them with an angry big country close by that still has the ability to reach out and touch them.
Thank you so much, David, as well as Henry. We really do appreciate your time and your insight here as you've talked through all of the ramifications of Donald Trump's address to the nation. Well, just after Donald Trump's address to the nation, stocks fell and the price of oil went up. The US president did not provide clarity on when the war in Iran would end, which some market analysts said made investors more defensive. Let's go straight to Patrick Falk. He joins us from Singapore now. And Patrick, you're watching the market reaction there for us. Can you just give us a bit of an update on how things are looking right now?
Yeah, well, not good is the answer. Asian markets had been set to advance prior to President Trump's most recent comments. The remarks really took the wind out of any optimism about any possible resolution to the crisis. MSCI's broadest share index of Asia Pacific shares fell by about 0.75% in early trade after President Trump talks about the possibility of blowing Iran back to the Stone Ages. Prior to that, Iran had taken the unusual step of reaching out to the US directly, issuing a letter saying to Americans that Iran had no enmity with the US and that it was acting in self-defense. That provided Washington with an off-ramp, which had helped lifted Wall Street stocks overnight. Instead, we're seeing investors take risk back off the table now, a lot of uncertainty returning to markets, and notably energy prices, as you mentioned, are rising once again. Brent crude currently trading at around $104 a barrel after previously dipping below the psychologically a significant level of $100 a barrel. So once again, we're seeing a lot of uncertainty. I think it's important to note also, though, that from what we've seen over the last couple of days, particularly with that record rise that we saw in Asian markets for the year yesterday, that if there is any resolution to the crisis, we are going to see markets bounce back very quickly indeed.
And Patrick, obviously governments across Asia have been forced to respond to price hikes and fuel prices with different policies to try and help ease the burden on people. Can you just talk us through some of the latest changes that they've been forced to make?
Yeah, well, I think, we're talking about South Korea specifically and some significant changes there. South Korea has implemented its energy disruption alert to the second highest level. That gives the government broad powers to manage the situation and to control supply and demand, and also to try and find alternative sources of energy. We're told that possibly that might mean some sort of swap arrangement between the government and the private sector to ensure supply. Japan and South Korea, notably, as we know, have got significant stockpiles, but reports say South Korea is now seeing physical disruption to its energy supply. The last shipment of oil was on March 20th, and there's no clear indication of when the next tankers are going to be able to arrive. So that is a big concern for the South Korean government. Another particular concern is about supply of naphtha. That's a light oil product that's crucial for South Korea's petrochemical industry, and it feeds into things like plastics and packaging, the auto sector, and electronics as well. And it could have a knock-on effect to the entire manufacturing supply chain. So South Korea is urgently trying to resolve that situation. Reports are saying that it will possibly source naphtha from Russia, and as we know, that is a product that currently it's supplied via the Middle East. It sources 70% of naphtha from the Middle East right now.
Yeah, the consequences, the repercussions continue to spread. Thanks so much, Patrick. Patrick Fock for us in Singapore. Let's take a look at some of other world news happening right now. NASA's Artemis 2 mission is on its way to the moon, carrying humans back there for the first time in 53 years.
Lift. 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition.
American astronauts Christina Koch, Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, and Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen will spend 10 days in deep space flying around the moon, but not touching down. That is planned for a future mission. Colin Baker has more on the crew's journey.
On its way to the farthest reaches, the Artemis space program has sent 4 astronauts on a loop around the moon.
It marks an important step.
It's a program that began during Donald Trump's first administration.
For the first time since 1970.
And it will be the first crewed mission to the moon in more than 50 years. Over 10 days, its crew will study their own health in the harsh weightlessness of space and photograph the moon from a few hundred kilometers away. The mission aims to prove the journey can be practical for humans and eventually can land people on the moon again, a goal China is also pursuing. Artemis is a U.S. project with international support. Europe, Japan, the United Arab Emirates are all involved. Canada built a robotic arm and gave it an astronaut. The moon holds few guaranteed resources or security advantages. It is a possible source for a fuel that could drive future nuclear power, but it could be a stepping stone to explore the solar system. The moon has always been a distant prize. The Soviet Union took the first photo of it from space in 1959. And then in the late 1960s, the United States and the Soviet Union raced to land their robots and put their satellites into its orbit. But all of that was just the beginning. Over 4 wild years, 12 humans bounced and drove across its surface. And then the moon was quiet for decades, until the early 2000s, when a new space race kicked off. Major powers sent more probes. China landed 6 and sent pieces of the moon back to Earth. And now private companies are getting there too. 70 years of lunar exploration, roughly divided into 2 chapters. The U.S. space agency NASA has had a tumultuous year. The White House Budget Office proposed major cuts, but the Congress voted to maintain funding. Staff departures have been high.
Commercial and international.
In March, Administrator Jared Isaacman promised to build a U.S. moon base within the next 7 years for $20 billion. The request came days after media reports said the Pentagon wanted $200 billion to fund the Iran war.
The vehicle's ready, the system is ready, the crew is ready, and behind this flight stands a campaign. Landings, a lunar base, a nuclear propulsion into deep space. That begins, not ends, with what happens on Wednesday evening.
If the mission succeeds, these 4 astronauts will go farther from home than any humans before them, around the far side of the moon. They'll be blocked from all communication from Earth while they're there, and for a few hours, they'll be totally cut off from the world below. Then they'll return to it, to splash down in the Pacific Ocean. Colin Baker, Al Jazeera.
The top U.S. court has been hearing arguments on the validity of President Donald Trump's executive order limiting automatic birthright citizenship. President Trump's order would prevent automatic citizenship for children born in the US to non-citizens and non-residents. The birthright citizenship clause is part of the Constitution. Trump attended the session, making him the first sitting president to do so. Patty Culhane reports.
Now, would you shout?
Outside the Supreme Court, a sizable crowd loudly demanding the justices uphold what has been the law of the land since 1868. All babies born here are automatically American citizens. Inside the court, a first for the country, U.S. President Donald Trump, the first sitting president to be in the room while the justices were hearing arguments over his executive order to end birthright citizenship for the children of migrants in the country without documentation or people visiting.
Unrestricted birthright citizenship contradicts the practice of the overwhelming majority of modern nations. It demeans the priceless and profound gift of American citizenship. It operates as a powerful pull factor for illegal immigration and rewards illegal aliens who not only violate the immigration laws, but also jump in front of those who follow the rules.
After court, the president took to social media, posting, "We are the only country in the world stupid enough to allow birthright citizenship." That is actually not true. This map shows more than 30 other countries with birthright citizenship, including Mexico, Canada, Brazil, and Pakistan. After the hearing, the lawyers suing to keep universal birthright citizenship expressed optimism.
I am confident that the court is going to turn back this president's effort to radically rewrite our 14th Amendment rule of birthright citizenship.
Protesters will likely be back when the court announces that it's made a decision, but that's not going to happen very soon, at earliest likely in June. Patty Culhane, Al Jazeera at the Supreme Court.
Well, you're watching Al Jazeera's extensive coverage of the conflict between the US, Israel and Iran. The latest developments this hour, US President Donald Trump says the US has nearly completed its core objectives in its war on Iran, but he warned of more intense bombing over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Speaking in an address from the White House, Trump repeated his call for other countries to, quote, take the oil they need from the Strait of Hormuz. Earlier, Iran's president issued an open letter to Americans, urging them to look beyond manufactured narratives on the war in Iran. Masoud Pezeshkian says his country bears no hostility toward people in the US, Europe, and neighboring countries. Well, Hezbollah says it has targeted several groups of Israeli soldiers in southern Lebanon. There have been no immediate reports of casualties. It comes as the military expands its occupation of the south. Sirens have also sounded in central Israel in response to incoming Hezbollah missiles. Heidi Pett has more from Beirut.
It has been reasonably quiet in the Lebanese capital this evening. We've got sort of used to, in a strange way, the sound of Israeli jets flying low and loud. They have mostly left the capital alone this evening, but there have been ongoing airstrikes across southern Lebanon, as that is the focus of this escalating Israeli ground invasion that has been ongoing for a number of days and, in fact, weeks now. And we saw the death toll here in Lebanon increasing once again today to 1,318 people killed, 125 of them children, and the number of wounded in this 4 weeks of war is now approaching 4,000. Now, the toll today includes one entire family in the district of Nabatea that was killed in an airstrike, a man, his wife, and their 2 daughters. As you're saying, Hezbollah continues to claim operations against Israel. They're saying that they're targeting Israeli troops operating on the ground here inside Lebanon. The fight appears to be continuing and focused on a town called Antara, where Hezbollah has been targeting Israeli troops with rockets. They're also claiming artillery and drone attacks. And of course, they are continuing to launch barrages of rockets and drones into northern Israel. They say they're targeting Israeli troops, bases, and barracks across the border.
The UN says it continues to investigate the death of 3 Indonesian UN peacekeepers in Lebanon. The incident comes as Israel expands its ground invasion deeper into the south of the country. The World Health Organization says 51 Lebanese health workers have been killed since the 2nd of March. Al Jazeera's Gabriela Elizondo pressed the UN spokesperson for when an investigation might be completed.
Given the serious nature of this,
we appreciate your subscription. This broadcast is shifting to our horizontal feed only and no longer in shorts. You can still watch on your phones anywhere in the world, but tap the notification bell now. Otherwise, you might miss us when we go live with The Truth.
Thank you to all our super fans for your Cash App and Super Chat support. We salute you.
They need to deconflict. We do
Become a channel member today to receive a gift from Morning Mic Drop on Truth Talks Live. Tap in for real news where your voice matters.
And the expectation by the Secretary General is that the investigation will determine not only what killed them, but who killed them?
In as much as possible. I mean, I can't prejudge not only the timeline, but what they will find. They may not be able to conclude.
President Trump says he's strongly considering withdrawing the United States from NATO. His comments expose a widening rift in the transatlantic alliance over the Iran war. NATO chief Mark Rutte is due to visit the White House next week for what the Western military alliance says is a long-planned visit. Our correspondent Rory Challens reports from London.
That Donald Trump has been souring on NATO recently is no secret.
They don't want to help us defend the strait, and they're the ones that need it.
We're very disappointed with NATO because NATO has done absolutely nothing. I think a tremendous mistake was when NATO just wasn't there. They just weren't there.
That he's considering leaving the 77-year-old military alliance must now be taken seriously, following an interview with British newspaper The Telegraph. Oh yes, I would say it's beyond reconsideration, Trump said. I was never swayed by NATO. I always knew they were a paper tiger. And Putin knows that too, by the way. A genuine possibility or Trumpian bluff to extort support for his war? That's the calculation leaders are having to make. This was the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
Whatever the pressure on me and others, whatever the noise, I'm going to act in the British national interest in all the decisions that I make.
Oh, wow. Thank you for the super chats coming in. Please support independent media like Morning Mic Drop on Truth Talks Live, where your voice matters.
Ça s'appelle la défense collective et la dissuasion aussi.
Let me remind you what NATO is. It is a military alliance concerned with the security of the Euro-Atlantic region. It is not designed to carry out operation in the Strait of Hormuz, which will be a breach of international law.
De l'espace euro-atlantique.
But European security would be shattered without US involvement. There is no NATO without the US, as the Polish defense minister admitted on X, though he added, there is also no strong US without its allies, without us. This memorial honours the British servicemen and women who fought in Afghanistan and Iraq, wars led by America but fought alongside its allies, NATO allies.
Thank you for subscribing to Truth Talks Live. Be sure to like this video now to keep our algorithm high.
Was ever invoked was not to defend Europe, but to defend America after 9/11. Rory Challens, Al Jazeera in London.
The Iran war has triggered a severe economic crisis across Africa. Countries reliant on fuel imports are facing an unprecedented energy crisis because of the sea traffic disruption at the Strait of Hormuz. Kulsum Sharif explains.
Hundreds of millions of Africans have been forced to adapt to higher fuel costs in the past month because of what's happening here. From South Africa to Egypt, fuel costs across the continent have jumped. The steepest rise of around 65% is in Nigeria, one of Africa's leading oil producers. Oil prices here are deregulated, which means they're determined by market forces and not the government. Also, the country imports refined fuel products because of its limited domestic refining capacity. Now, governments are announcing energy-saving measures. In Zimbabwe, they are increasing the amount of ethanol in petrol from 5 to 20%. Others, like South Africa, are reducing taxes on fuel. Now, in Ethiopia, this is what we are seeing. People waiting for hours to fill up. Now, the country imports all its fuel from the Gulf and has begun rationing petrol as shortages hit supplies, and diesel supply has nearly halved. The island nation of Mauritius, again highly dependent on oil imports, is low on supply. A shipment expected in March has failed to arrive. The government has announced energy-saving measures with stocks just for about 15 to 20 days left. Now, the access to fertilizer essential in food production has also been badly affected. Now, the near closure of the Strait of Hormuz has halted 1/3 of global fertilizer trade. Now, it's pushing up prices and it's threatening agriculture.
We appreciate your subscription. This broadcast is shifting to our horizontal feed only and no longer in shorts. You can still watch on your phones anywhere in the world, but tap the notification bell now. Otherwise, you might miss us when we go live with The Truth.
Become a channel member today to receive a gift from Morning Mic Drop on Truth Talks Live. Tap in for real news where your voice matters.
Days, if not weeks, to that travel time.
Thank you to all our super fans for your Cash App and Super Chat support. We salute you.
Companies that officially start refilling their depots on the 1st of April are reluctant to buy with gas prices skyrocketing since the Iran war began last month. The European Commission is urging citizens to save energy. Step Vassen has the story from the Netherlands.
I'm here at one of Europe's largest gas storages near Amsterdam. Here, gas is stored underground for winter time. But this facility here is only about 12% full. Companies usually start filling these storages at the start of April. But now buyers are reluctant due to high prices. And with the weather not getting any warmer, these storages are getting emptier every day. Europe imports around 85% of its natural gas. The European Union made gas storage mandatory after 2022, when Russia's war with Ukraine triggered shortages. But the rule that all EU countries should fill their gas storage depots by 90% by November 1st was relaxed last year after it drove up gas prices. The result is that at the end of March, gas storage facilities across the EU are now only around 28% full, compared to 33% this time last year, and 58% the year before. In Germany, storages are now only 22% full compared to 29% in 2025. And in the Netherlands, they are extremely low at only 5%. Still, the key message in Europe is not to panic. The EU hopes that these underground storages supplying 1/3 of gas consumption in winter will still be filled. And if not, governments will have to dig deep into their pockets to buy expensive gas, a price consumers will face in their energy bills.
We say remain cool-headed, let the market do its work, but make sure to look at emergency scenarios. We therefore recommend the government to look into the option of using so-called cushion gas needed to keep the pressure inside these storages as a last resort in case of an emergency.
Brussels warns Europe could soon face a severe energy crisis and is calling on EU citizens to save energy. But so far, countries like the Netherlands have not followed this advice. If gas storage capacity isn't increased soon, Europe could face shortages, especially if the war between the United States, Israel and Iran lasts longer and gas supplies remain low. Step Vassen, Al Jazeera, Bergermeer, the Netherlands.
Time to see how the war in Iran is impacting the financial markets. From London, here's Milena Veselinovic.
Hello and welcome to Al Jazeera studio in London. Our roundup would look at how the Iran conflict will ultimately affect the cost of borrowing. Now, while the Iran war continues to cloud economic...
We're incredibly grateful for every single one of our subscribers. Whether you just discovered at Truth Talks Live or you've been a day one truth teller, we see you and we're proud to show up for you every day. But here's the reality. Independent media is under attack. We're committed to bringing you real voices, real perspectives, and a truly multicultural lens on world news. And that mission comes at a cost. Over 300,000 viewers tune in daily. And now, we're asking you to take the next step with us. If every viewer gave just $1 through Cash App, Zelle, or PayPal, it would keep our engine running strong and allow us to continue delivering facts, not fiction. So here's the challenge. Support what you believe in. Tap the Cash App symbol or become a paid member today. And from all of us, thank you.